What exactly can happen when people try to show and tell just a little too much? Well, let's get right to it and start with number 5, running for the status. Before she was arrested for credit card fraud, Ariel Foster was a track star at LaSalle University in Boston. She had a bright future there as a student athlete until the arrest. Foster ran for the track team while studying at LaSalle on a scholarship. At the time, she was a freshman with very little money. So, to help pay for some of her living expenses, Foster got a job at Burlington Mall in their jewelry store called La Visa. One day, during an interview with a local newspaper reporting on her athletic performance, Foster bragged to the reporter that she was buying herself a $35,000 Tesla sedan. After buying the car, Foster posted a photo of the red car on social media. She posted the photo in February, along with several other posts of fancy things she bought. These items included a $5,000 Louis Vuitton purse, $6,000 worth of Delta airline tickets, which brought her to Maui, Hawaii, where she spent an additional $20,000 for the hotel there. The part that busted Foster the most was the caption of her Tesla post. She wrote that the Tesla was her biggest flex because she paid for it with cash money instead of taking out a car loan. Police started looking into Foster's bank statements after the jewelry store La Visa reported a massive theft at their store of over $500,000. Her bank statements revealed the exact amount that La Visa had lost and showed up on her account around the time of the theft. The investigators arrested Foster in her dorm room, even though the track star insisted she was innocent. The investigators brought her in and showed her the evidence they had, leading to Foster confessing to the theft. Foster admitted to stealing the money and revealed to detectives how she managed to embezzle so much money. In a nutshell, Foster would increase the price of an already expensive item, sell the item to a customer, then siphon the extra money off to herself. How did she do it? Foster figured out how to transfer the difference over to a credit card she owned. Foster began this process on February 2nd and stopped on February 22nd, the day La Visa called the police to report a card scanning machine breach. Foster claimed that she had stolen the money to help relieve stress that stemmed from the need to provide for her and her family. However, the lack of stress detected in her later interviews and the fact that a good chunk of the money was spent on material things for herself shed lots of doubt on her claims. Foster is facing grand larceny charges, which could very well result in jail time. Number 4, PPP Luxuries. Supposed small business owner Leon Miles spent his first couple months of the pandemic buying a Bentley and an Escalade. The grand total for both cars amounted to $350,000, $250K for the Bentley and $100K for the Cadillac Escalade. There were the latest models. Not long after purchasing the luxurious cars, Miles posted photos of them on his social media pages, mainly Instagram. The post looked oddly suspicious to investigators, who knew that, based on government records, Miles had recently received a substantial amount of funds from the PPP, $1.9 million to be exact. We don't need to tell you that the Payment Protection Program is meant to help businesses maintain their payrolls while not getting any operating income, and not for buying luxury cars. Also, similar to the unemployment assistance programs, the PPP only required some taxes documentation that can easily be forged by literally anyone with a computer, and basic knowledge of how to fill out a form. Miles was one such individual. Miles lived and worked in Brooklyn, New York, where he owned his very own company called 114 Macon. When the government announced the Paycheck Protection Program in 2020, Miles decided to use his business to get relief for his payroll. He claimed that 114 Macon had 50 employees and an average monthly payroll of $768,838. The program accepted his tax returns and other tax documents and awarded him $1.9 million, enough to hold 114 Macon's payroll over for at least 2 months. Miles received the funds in his savings account a short time later after submitting his files. As you already know, Miles spent a good-sized chunk of his funds on luxury cars. One might assumed that he gave the rest to his 50 employees. He didn't, because Miles didn't have 50 employees. He didn't even have 40 or even 10 employees. Miles had 0 people working for him. After investigators saw the Instagram posts, they decided to take a closer look at Miles' tax records. They found that in reality, Miles' company, 114 Macon, hadn't filed any tax returns for the previous year, 2019. And the business address he listed wasn't a commercial address, but his home. Investigators quickly charged Miles with committing fraud for forging his tax documents to use taxpayer dollars for his own selfish material gain. In July of 2022, Miles pleaded guilty to making false statements on a document. Despite pleading guilty, Miles still received 72 months behind bars from the judge, partially because his max sentence was 30 years and because the federal and state governments are trying to make an example of criminals like Miles. The government has provided over $500 billion in relief money through the PPP. But unfortunately, some of those funds were obtained through forgeries, costing the government billions. Fortunately, in Miles' case, the government was able to recover some of the money he stole after freezing the loan. Number 3. Desto. Young female rapper Lotta Cash Desto was known for her Instagram posts showing her posing with expensive jewelry and stacks of cash. Her posts feature selfies with diamond chains and real cash in hand, not an uncommon thing for a successful rapper to do. And Desto was quite successful. She had 2 big singles, Lunchroom and Vegas, both collaborations with her mentor and chart-topping rapper Lil Uzi Vert. While the Memphis rapper earned her money legally, unlike the other people on this list, she unfortunately wasn't able to escape the consequences of posting her material wealth on social media. Desto was in Houston with her young friend, cruising around in her Porsche SUV, when she stopped at a red light at around 2:30 a.m. While at the light, a black sedan pulled up next to her. Then, 2 men jumped out and opened fire on Desto and her friend. One of the men who attacked Desto, Christian Isaiah Williams, was found in a nearby parking lot. He was suffering from a wound to the midsection given to him by Desto. Officers who found Williams also found some of Desto's possessions, confirming that it was for a robbery. When the officers and paramedics arrived on the scene, they found Desto. She had already passed by the time they got there. Desto's friend was found with a single wound, but still alive. She was immediately transported to a hospital where she received treatment for her injuries. Police and other security experts have long warned hip-hop artists, along with anyone who collects expensive jewelry, to avoid posting it on social media, especially if you're famous, like Desto was. Number 2. Pooling money. Parents at a primary school in Surrey, England, had been wondering why their kids still didn't have enough supplies, despite funneling hundreds of thousands of pounds into an after-school fund. After all the years spent wondering, the parents had their answers. The school bursar, Debbie Poole, had been siphoning off hundreds of thousands of pounds from the school's accounts. From 2011 to 2018, the school had struggled to provide their students with even basic supplies. One parent recalls her child coming home with a bunch of paper cutouts and a poster, all separated because they didn't have the glue to stick them to the poster. To help supply the school, parents and administrators put on several different fundraisers: cake sales, dinners, balls, and quiz nights. Meanwhile, Poole was pulling up to work in fancy cars like her Ford Cougar, while the head teacher drove around in an old Ford Fiesta. Poole had been working for the school for 18 years and hadn't had many problems in that period. In fact, she'd been given promotions throughout her entire career there. The school, known as Hinchley Wood Primary School, initially hired Poole as a senior administration officer. Then they promoted Poole to school business manager in 2011, which gave Poole direct access to the school's finances. The school had around 600 students at the time, meaning that their fundraisers were capable of bringing in substantial amounts of money. As the business manager, Poole would take in cash donated from parents directly. She also allocated funds through the school's bank account. Much of the account was made up of money from Woody's, the school's after-school program that Poole ran as a manager. Poole had the power to do whatever she wished with the cash and could send the money in the account virtually anywhere. She also had the power to write checks from the school. In other words, Poole had full control over every cent the primary school owned, particularly the fundraiser money. Mrs. Poole really enjoyed traveling. Many teachers are fortunate enough to have a couple of months off during the summer, and Poole made sure to make the most of her long vacation time. She and her husband Gary went on several lavish trips together. They spent their money at a 5-star getaway in a deluxe-sized bungalow with its very own private pool at a Greek holiday resort. They later returned to Greece to drop £13,000 on a 10-day stay at the exclusive Icos Olivia Resort in Thessaloniki. That same year, in 2018, Gary and Debbie Poole went on a more local trip to the Cotswolds, where they spent another £7,000 to stay at a luxury cottage for 15 people. They also went on Christmas vacations, spending their New Year's in places such as Amsterdam and Venice. Poole was caught thanks to a whistleblower. The whistleblower said they decided to come forward to expose corrupt and bullying culture at the school. But most of all, they wanted to bring Poole to justice. When investigators eventually sifted through Poole and other administrators' offices, they found piles of checkbooks and bank statements. 48 of these statements were still in their envelopes, meaning that no one had seen what Poole had been doing, at least on paper, for 48 months. Since 2011, Poole had been transferring money to her accounts and writing herself checks periodically. In total, the investigation found that Poole had stolen over £500,000 from the school. And while she spent a good chunk of it on nice cars, the rest was poured into her proverbial travel suitcase. For her crimes, Poole is expected to receive a sentence from British courts in the coming months. Number 1. Unemployment money. 100 key bank debit cards. That's how many cards a team of young male scam artists used to defraud the government out of over $2 million during the pandemic. The scam started in June of 2020 and continued over into May of 2021. They stemmed from the government's efforts to help businesses and individuals during the economic shutdown caused by the mandated mass quarantine. The shelter-in-place orders were enforced all around the world, leading to many businesses having their revenue streams completely cut off. Anticipating a payroll freeze, the government started a program that would provide money for companies to fund their payroll and in turn pay their employees. Still, many companies had to lay off employees, which led to a temporary high unemployment rate. To combat the issue, the government created assistance programs to help people get by during periods of unemployment. The assistance was necessary because many companies during this period in 2020 and 2021 had stopped hiring new employees. Of course, that didn't stop millions of financial criminals from exploiting the program, including the scam artists mentioned earlier. In this case, the young men were able to obtain the unemployment benefits much more easily than before. The government wanted to hand out as much assistance as possible to as many unemployed people as possible, so the benefit requirements were much lower. The 8 suspects included 18-year-old Brian Adams, 19-year-old Gianni Stewart, 20-year-old Carlos Vasquez, 25-year-old Andre Ruddock, 18-year-old Angel Cabrera, and 18-year-old Seth Golding. Yes, most of the suspects in this crime were barely even legal adults, but their young age didn't stop them from pulling off a relatively complex financial crime. The 8 began their scheme by stealing personal information from various unemployed individuals and used this information to create the aforementioned 100 debit cards. The debit cards were then used to withdraw money from various ATM machines in and around where they lived in New York, including the Flatlands and a couple spots in Eastern Queens. The suspects might have gotten away with the scam like so many others have, but they decided their newfound wealth was just too good to not post on their social media pages. They posted photos of themselves holding fat stacks of cash inside expensive sports cars, then stacking more cash on top of the expensive sports cars, all of which were way beyond the wages they earned from their jobs. Suddenly, the 8 young men had $2 million worth of luxury items in cash. Authorities, who were searching for those responsible for the identity theft, found the social media posts published online by the 8 young men. After some more digging into the 8 young men, investigators eventually found more evidence that suggested they had fraudulently obtained their money through a mass debit card scheme, including surveillance footage of one of the suspects, Armani Miller, withdrawing money from a Capital One ATM machine. They soon compiled other pieces of evidence, enough to arrest the 8 scam artists and charge them with several fraud-related charges.
Who were some of the dumbest criminals out there who were just begging to get caught? Olsi Behaluli posted the money he made from dealing on Twitter, and Lorraine Graves actually commented on her own most wanted Facebook post made by police. Let's get right into it. Number 4. Model Citizen. Olsi Behaluli used his above-average looks to garner meager fame on TV, then dashed it all with a photo showing him surrounded by some 240,000 pounds in drug money. The man claimed he had previously appeared on dating show My Little Princess, featured on Channel 4. With the show's IMDb page barren and clips all but scrubbed from the web, that claim is difficult to verify. In any case, details about his life aside from that are fairly sparse. For those who aren't privy to the 2013 flash-in-the-pan phenomenon that was My Little Princess, it was a dating show conducted in about the most over-the-top manner possible. The ridiculousness included challenges like guessing the princess's favorite conspiracy theory and singing karaoke to her during her first meeting. Knights or contestants who didn't get into the princess's good graces were tossed into a moat by a giant in armor. No, seriously. Behalouli didn't become a prince after the show. Instead, he fell in with a drug-running gang and then royally blew it, getting himself jailed in one of the dumbest ways possible. He even took associates Basim Topali and Azim Prashka with him. Members of one of the many notorious gangs that have a stranglehold on England's illegal drug market to this day, the three were all part of the same operation, which made it possible for Behalouli's mistake to blow the whole thing apart. If you're raking in lots of cash, you may be tempted to flaunt it. For people like internet influencers and celebrities whose continued raking in depends on showing off the cash they've already got, that makes sense. For a model and drug dealer, yeah, not so much. Behalouli apparently didn't get the memo. The dude posted a photo to Instagram surrounded by mountains of cash. You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to guess what happened next. The cops arrested Behalouli himself first. He tried to cover for his gang, saying that the photo in question was taken in Albania with a relative's money. London's finest didn't buy it. They raided the gang's stash house and arrested 2 other members. Police ultimately broke up the whole operation, which amounted to some £4 million between cocaine and heroin. Behalouli is just one of many criminals flexing their wealth online where their actions have backfired. Even so, the judge didn't go easy on the group of thugs. The former dating show star caught an 11-year sentence out of a total of 31 years between him and his 2 goons. Topali and Prashka, once they've served their 10-year sentences, will be headed back to Albania. Wealth signaling has been a prominent gang activity around the world, but in the UK, it's picked up a special significance in the past few years. Notable Albanian gangs, such as the Helbanians, have been going as far as producing music videos. The goal seems to be attracting more young men from their homeland to join in and tighten the gang's stranglehold on UK criminal enterprises. That practice may be a bit more restrained in the future, since these arrests have made it clear that authorities are watching out. Behalouli's personal Twitter account has been active recently and seems to indicate that all is well with his life as a model. Given the implied but unproven gang ties, there's no way to know at this point if he's going to reoffend. Albanian gang culture seems to run on loyalty and vengeance, but on the surface at least, it appears that the star of this story has reformed. Number 3. Brotherly Dumb. David Guerrera, 17, and Ezra Guerrera, 21, recently caught charges in Texas thanks to Instagram posts by David showing off the pair's guns and cash. Life can be tough for young brothers living together without a parent, but these two didn't make things any easier for themselves by falling into the wrong career track. The pair had been living together in the south side of San Antonio in the lead-up to the arrests. Alerted to the social media postings, the Bexar County Sheriff's Office moved on David first. They found him in traffic, and during the stop, they discovered a loaded gun, hash oil, and cash in the car. David was detained on the spot, along with his older brother, who was riding shotgun. A search of the pair's home yielded more weapons, marijuana, cocaine, and $15,000 in cash. The pair were booked immediately. Texas law, strictly speaking, still criminalizes marijuana in all its forms. The only statewide exception is non-smokable hemp, with a few caveats. Even so, many products with an extremely low or negligible concentration of THC are allowed. Additionally, many police departments and even entire cities and counties are simply refusing to prosecute for small amounts that could conceivably be for personal use. That didn't do the brothers much good. Along with weapons and traffic charges, both brothers got controlled substance charges for the cocaine. The marijuana, meanwhile, was found to be in excess of the 4-ounce legal limit for a misdemeanor charge in Texas. This makes it an automatic felony and made the cops throw the book at the duo that much harder. As of this writing, the case seems to be ongoing. We'll have to wait and see what the criminal justice system does with these two wannabe hard cases. Number 2. Comment section. Lorraine Graves must have felt like a real celebrity when she commented on a public entity's Facebook post that was talking about her back in July of 2021. The hang-up? The post named her as an accessory to murder, and the comment got her arrested. The shooting happened in March, and the original post from the Tulsa, Oklahoma police went up on a Wednesday. The very next day, Graves was arrested. The details of the crime aren't easily available as of this writing, but sources say that the unfortunate person, Arent Graves, was shot and his body found inside an apartment. Whether it was his own wasn't laid out. Another victim was also injured. The two perpetrators, Jaden and Gabrielle Hobson, were actually brought in first, leaving police on the hunt for Graves. She wound up on the very top of the city's most wanted list. That's not the kind of fame you want to embrace. But Graves' comment asking about reward money lightened the mood considerably in light of how serious the crime was. Police couldn't help but rag on Graves after she outed herself. In a more open and shut case, there would definitely be room for such gloating. This one, well, things got a bit more complicated. Not long after Lorraine Graves shot off her mouth, then mugged for the camera in handcuffs, there was a major break in the case that completely revamped authorities' suspect list. A man previously thought of as only a witness, Wendell Alexander, now faces first-degree murder charges alongside Jaden Hobson. Evidence indicates two shooters, and new details have brought to light that Jaden and Wendell were the likely trigger pullers. Lorraine's original charges of accessory to murder weren't modified all that much. After her cousin was gone, she was thought to have helped hide the guns used in the crime and protect the criminals. Gabrielle Hobson, meanwhile, is alleged to have helped hide evidence, including the corpse, and taken items of value from the victim after death. This complicated case is still in the air as of the latest update from our local sources, which dropped in September of 2021. Number 1. 24-hour help. Frances Noble of Hertfordshire, England, was in need of 24-hour care. Due to a neurological condition, she was no longer able to feed herself, take care of household obligations, head out in public, or do any of the numerous other things that most of us take for granted. The poor woman was bedridden and needed carers on staff around the clock to ensure that her needs were met. Her condition put her into a bedridden state as far back as 2005, and she petitioned her local government for help in getting the care she needed. A common practice seen in the UK and abroad is to give the sick person a fixed stipend to pay out to carers of their choice. Hertfordshire County Council was glad to take care of one of their own, and over the course of more than 11 years, they paid out over £702,000. Here's the thing though, it was all one big lie. The whole thing fell apart when authorities opened up an investigation in 2018. Noble admitted as much and said that starting in 2007, she was receiving money that she didn't actually need. She also admitted that herself, her daughter, and her son-in-law were living high on the hog with that money. The £702,000 and some change, paid out since 2005, wasn't the amount that charges for the trio ended up being based on. Instead, the amount paid since 2007 was the basis for the charges, coming up close to £625,000. The scam was a fairly elaborate one. The scam in its original form was fairly simple. Noble got money from the council to hire carers, and she didn't spend all of it on the intended care. She kept some of the cash for herself and hired her own daughter, Laura Borrell, who was paid a decent amount. Borrell's husband, Philip, was also in on the whole thing. Using their part of the ill-gotten gains, the younger couple took off on a number of vacations. They went to places like San Francisco, Canada, and Boston. The pair even benefited from a GoFundMe set up in 2017 by Noble to help them with a big vacation. The story behind that one only makes things juicier. In 2017, the Borrells went on ITV's This Morning. Laura, then 39, claimed that she was one of the youngest frontal temporal dementia patients on record. The pair regaled audiences with the struggles caused by the disorder, including Laura having to stop pursuing a career in law. Noble's GoFundMe page reportedly raised around £1,500 towards a grand trip to help Laura make memories before her memory was affected by the disease. With the details of the case being as they are, the Borrells' claim to a neurological condition may seem dubious. According to Laura's attorney, the claim was legitimate. The first real signs of trouble came in 2015, when neighbors began to notice Noble being a lot more active than she logically should have been, given her condition. Notably, she was reported seeing out walking her dog, meaning she had to keep up with the animal. In one encounter, she was said to have spotted a neighbor spying on her walking the grounds around her home, then pulled her hood on and claimed to be a carer, not Noble herself. Another neighbor said that Noble was seen taking a home delivery of groceries. The reports coming in from neighbors included video evidence. Authorities simply couldn't ignore the situation any longer and launched their own investigation. They began observing Noble's residence, and what they found sealed the deal. Not only was Noble up and about when she was claiming to be bedridden, but there were no indications of any visits by care staff. Naturally, authorities pounced. Police nabbed the Borals in short order, but Noble gave them the slip. When the heat was officially on, Noble decided to lay low in Berlin. Specifically, she settled in Rohrwalele, a somewhat affluent suburb not far from Berlin's limits, in 2019. Even so, St. Albans Crown Court managed to have proper hearings about the matter. One hearing happened with Noble present to admit to fraud by false representation, and another happened without her. In the end, all three fraudsters were sentenced. The three admitted to a limited number of counts that don't quite add up to the grand sum involved in the whole scheme. What they did decide to admit to in court was enough to earn them all some serious jail time. The Borals came together to admit to a joint charge of receiving criminal property, about £184,000 in all. The two got their own individual charges as well. Laura confessed to receiving criminal property in the amount of £39,700. Philip pulled down a significantly lower amount, admitting to only £6,218. Noble, meanwhile, admitted to one count of fraud and one count of transferring criminal property for £130,649. Noble, being the ringleader in the whole affair, was sentenced to 4 years and 9 months in jail. As of this writing, she's awaiting extradition from Germany to serve her sentence in England. Laura Burrell, the daughter, got 3 years and 9 months. Philip Burrell, the son-in-law, was sentenced to 4 years and 3 months.
It's August of 2022, and Sarah Jacqueline King is celebrating her birthday with her husband, her golden doodle, and a few friends. And she's having a splendid time. Her apartment is in a suite at the Wynn Las Vegas, and it's a picture of luxury. There's caviar, cupcakes, frosted with Dior's logo, and even a cake shaped like a Chanel handbag. One of her friends, present at the house, a woman named Amal Obeid Schmid, wishes Sarah a happy birthday, and both women look like perfect best friends. But that was last year, and things have now changed. For one, Amal Obeid Schmid no longer thinks the world of Sarah. In fact, she now hates Sarah. And that hate is connected to who Sarah Jacqueline King is and how she scammed her way to a celebrity lifestyle in Vegas, spending $10 million of other people's money. Before meeting Sarah King, Amal Obeid Schmid lived a relatively calm life as a trauma surgeon in California. One day, she and her husband met Sarah and her husband at the Wynn Hotel in Vegas. Before long, the couple started building an amazing friendship. Soon, Amal and her husband began to host the Kings at their homes in the Los Angeles suburbs. Sarah and her husband also reciprocated and hosted Amal and her husband at a house party in Vegas. However, Sarah's house wasn't some quiet and boring apartment on the corner of the street. It was a huge villa. Amal and her husband were in awe of Sarah's extravagance. After a while, Sarah convinced Amal and her husband to invest in her business, King Family Lending. The business was supposed to provide funds to third-party lenders for wealthy clients. Amal completely bought into the idea, so she and her husband invested their entire life savings. Perhaps the reason why Sarah was so good at selling the idea of a phantom lending business is that it wasn't the first time she'd done it. Sarah King had already successfully scammed LDR International Limited, a British Islands firm, into loaning her money for this fake company too. LDR International started extending business loans to the King Family Lending in January 2022. Under the deal they made, King Family Lending was supposed to use the funds for loans for third-party borrowers. In the 10 months that followed, LDR International gave King Family Lending about 97 loans, which totaled over $10 million. But King Family Lending wasn't lending any money to third-party lenders. Instead, Sarah took all that money, rented a villa in Vegas, and gambled all the money away. Because that's what you do when you get $10 million for your lending business. Sarah King's ex-husband is Cameron Pahlavi. Pahlavi once owned a restaurant in West Hollywood and has made a career out of developing hotels in Morocco. Before Pahlavi fled the country in light of his ex-wife's lawsuits, he spoke to LDR International and substantiated all their claims about Sarah's operations. Pahlavi was the one who introduced Sarah to LDR International. His rationale was that he wanted her business to grow, and he believed the best way it could grow was for her to get access to credit. The facade of Sarah's life began to crack when Pahlavi noticed that some of the bank documents she sent to him about her business were forged. He and his friends began to look closer at the statements and soon found out other inconsistencies that suggested that the documents were fake. The statements were altered to show payments to third-party lenders that were never made. The worst part is that these statements made it to LDR International, and the company continued to finance King Family Lending off those fake statements. Sarah didn't depend on just fake statements to defraud LDR International. She also used pictures taken with NFL stars to gain some credibility by showcasing her celebrity clientele. Some of the stars she took pictures with include Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen. Unfortunately for LDR International, the pictures were just pictures and meant nothing. LDR International continued to approve loans for King Family Lending, and Sarah continued to spend those loans. Eventually, she'd spent almost all the money, so she had no choice but to go back to the company and ask for another tranche of loans. When she made these requests for extra cash, she would forge documents about the third-party borrowers the money was supposedly going to. Sarah also lied about the personalities the loans were going to: NFL, NBA, and MLB players, among other very wealthy people. She once said she was giving a loan to a superstar hairstylist for the Kardashians. In the process of perpetrating her fraud, Sarah told LDR International that she'd gotten about $6 million in loan repayments, but had used those funds for other loans. But there were no loans. There were no loan repayments. Amal and her husband first met Sarah at the Wynn in Vegas. When they met Sarah, she was dressed in very expensive designers like Dior and Chanel. She gave off an aura of wealth, and Amal was immediately blown away. The couple got talking, and Sarah began to reel them in with interesting tales. She talked about her previous job as a lawyer. She told Amal that she'd litigated for many years and had put a lot of bad people behind bars. But lawyering was too stressful, so she switched to owning her own lending business. From that day forward, Amal and Sarah became extremely close friends. So close that Amal and her husband even gave Sarah advice about marital issues. In due course, Sarah made her move. She told Amal's husband that she was willing to allow him to invest in her company as a favor. She told him that she only dealt with big clients like professional athletes and billionaires, but she was willing to give him the opportunity because of how close they'd become. Sarah explained that the business would be simple. They invest a certain amount of money, and Sarah would lend that money back to athletes and sports stars who didn't want a loan showing up in their bank account. These loans went to purchasing gifts that these stars wanted to hide from their records. The loans would then be paid back with fantastic interest. Amal and her husband were convinced Sarah was a close friend, and she certainly knew what she was doing. Amal also knew where Sarah shopped, and it was apparent that she was an extremely wealthy person. The pair got so close that when Sarah's birthday came around, Amal decided to get her earrings fashioned in her favorite number, 8. But their relationship went sour a few months later after Amal discovered that Sarah wasn't going to pay back their investment. Sarah signed a number of promissory notes, forged documents proving that she'd paid, and even lied that her ex-husband was preventing her from making the payments. But one thing she didn't do was pay back the investment. All of this came as a rude shock to Amal. She trusted Sarah with her life, and she'd been repaid with the worst sort of betrayal. While all this was going on, someone identifying themselves as Taylor began to send puzzling emails to Sarah's victims from Sarah's email address. Taylor claimed that Sarah was incapacitated and that she'd been empowered by Sarah to reach out and settle some matters. This mysterious Taylor also somehow promised Amal Obeid-Schmid a Lamborghini. The vehicle never came. Another of Sarah's victims, Yumi Sturdivant, also got an email from Taylor, but this letter was filled with insults. Maybe Sarah told Taylor that she didn't just like Sturdivant and that much. Yumi Sturdivant and Sarah King go way back. They met while working at a real estate firm back in 2017 and then decided to quit to start their own marketing agency. They lost touch in 2021 and only reconnected in early 2022. When they reconnected, Sarah immediately offered Yumi an investment opportunity. Sarah explained that by just investing $10,000, she would be able to double the money in 3 days. It was too good to be true. Yumi didn't want to send the money at first, but she eventually fell for Sarah's lies and sent the money. She never got it back. After Yumi wired the money to Sarah, Sarah started posting pictures she had with Yumi on Instagram. Pictures were a way to continue to emotionally blackmail Yumi, and it showed just how heartless Sarah was willing to be. Another of Sarah's victims is George Poulos. George loaned Sarah around $125,000, and the cash was never repaid. George loaned Sarah the money for interest in a yacht. However, that never materialized. In the process of getting his funds back from Sarah, George realized that he wasn't the only victim. He also learned that Sarah had used the boat she promised him as collateral for several other loans unbeknownst that she didn't even actually own the boat. George did carry out his investigations before loaning Sarah any money. He'd visited her home to see the collateral she'd put up for the loan, and at the time, they all seemed legit. The last George heard from Sarah King, she was willing to settle. However, that settlement never materialized. Another victim of Sarah's fraudulent business was the founder of a California makeup line. Mana Kadar, the founder of Mana Kadar Cosmetics, is now alleging that King persuaded her to part with $62,000. Apparently, Sarah used her position as a lawyer to gain Miss Kadar's confidence and then convinced her to invest cash into King family lending through loans. To make the offer extra juicy, Sarah first put up her engagement ring as collateral, then claimed she needed it back, so she offered an Audemars Piguet watch instead. Of course, it turned out that the watch was fake. Sarah King's exploits in the world of multi-dimensional fraud only got popular in 2022, but that doesn't mean she hadn't been playing the game long before then. Mayor Casillas Berger was working at a Californian beauty store when she became friends with Sarah. One day, Sarah invited Mayor over to the exclusive Balboa Bay Club and asked her to become a personal assistant. In time, Mayor began to notice that Sarah was always on the run from her business partners. They always wanted to speak to her or book an appointment, and she always found a way to wriggle out of it. In the meantime, Mayor moved in with Sarah and started traveling the world with her. During this period, Mayor noticed that Sarah might not sleep for days and would leave the house in the middle of the night. She also shut her phone off fairly regularly and went no contact for days. This was very puzzling behavior to Mayor. However, the puzzle was solved when Sarah scammed her as well. In November 2021, Sarah took $5,000 from Mayor during a work trip to Vegas, abandoned her at a casino hotel, and then ghosted her. Apart from collecting $5,000, Sarah also used Mayor's credit card to purchase first-class tickets to Hawaii. As expected, Sarah never repaid the money for the tickets. Despite constantly being on the run from multiple creditors, Sarah still managed to live a life of absolute luxury. Mayor frequently accompanied Sarah to expansive garages where the most luxurious cars were parked. Sarah claimed that these vehicles, some of which included Bentleys and Rolls Royces, belonged to her. She also went on shopping sprees at designer stores and took weekly chartered flights to a private airport in Las Vegas where she claimed to have high-level business meetings. Most of the payments for these expenses were made in cash, and Mayor, her assistant, was tasked with not only basic assistant work, but also with picking bags of cash up from the bank. But Sarah wasn't just interested in money. She also sought status in her quest for wealth. That's why she got herself into the Gen Next Foundation, a conservative-leaning Newport Beach-based nonprofit. However, members of the foundation saw right through her act. They quickly realized that although Sarah looked like she had a lot of money, she behaved in a way that suggested that she was just nouveau rich. Sarah once asked the members of the foundation, who were at lunch at the time, if they wanted to see her new Bentley, the hallmark of someone who recently came into wealth and was still managing the luxury that came with it. While Sarah wasn't good at blending in with high society, she was expert at coming up with excuses. She gave so many excuses that it's really hard to keep track of all of them. When George Poulos started searching for her to collect his money, she had Mayor tell George that her grandmother had passed. At the time, Mayor started seeing just how fake Sarah was and even thought that Sarah was somewhat sick in the head. What allowed Sarah to get away with these excuses was that she was good at getting people to believe her. She had so much charisma that people believed anything she said, no matter how insane it was. Aside from making excuses, Sarah also loved playing with people. Many times, she gave Mayor little tests to see if she could make something happen. Once, she sent Mayor to a high-end restaurant in Orange County that wouldn't do takeout orders to collect a salad for lunch. Mayor complained that the restaurant didn't do takeout orders, but Sarah insisted that she make it happen. Surprisingly, Mayor did make it happen. However, she had to tell the hostess that Sarah was a psychopathic boss first. On their last trip to Vegas, Mayor saw Sarah lose $40,000 playing at the high-stakes roulette table in 15 minutes flat. Once the $40,000 was exhausted, Sarah asked Mayor to borrow $5,000. Mayor obliged, as she wrongly believed that she would be reimbursed. That night, Sarah put Mayor to another test. She asked Mayor to get her stuff from a room in the hotel, despite not having a key. That meant that Mayor had to find a guard that liked her enough and believed her enough to open the doors with an extra key. It seemed impossible, but Mayor eventually did it. When Mayor brought the luggage to meet Sarah, she didn't even acknowledge her or pretend like she'd completed some important task. She simply took the bags and told Mayor to to go on leave. So Mare went on leave and stopped hearing from Sarah. When she started texting Sarah for the money she was owed, Sarah's answer was simple. She didn't owe Mare anything, as she'd taken Mare out and paid for a lot of dinners for her, so they were even Steven. Of course, this affected Mare profoundly. She'd built a very close sister relationship with Sarah. It was the worst sort of betrayal. So what's Sarah King up to today? No one knows. We do know that she's still somewhere in Las Vegas, gambling away money borrowed from others and maybe taking some more pictures with important people. We also know that about 6 casinos have banned her and are on the lookout for her. Beyond that, no one knows much else. Her creditors are still asking questions. No one knows when or if they'll get their answers. Canadian divas Jyoti and Kiran Matharu had their eyes set on a luxurious lifestyle. They wanted it all: shoes, makeup, jewelry, private jets, and soon all their wishes would come true. When Kiran turned 21, she met a Nigerian businessman while working at her job. They got into a relationship, and shortly after, he introduced Jyoti to his friend. It turned out that his friend was a Nigerian petroleum tycoon and wanted to fly her and her sister out to Nigeria with him. While their relationship blossomed, the sisters had the experience of flying on a private jet to Greece, France, and finally Nigeria, where his drivers took them to a mansion. While Kiran relaxed by the pool, Jyoti was given all sorts of expensive gifts, including a $10,000 monthly check. Jyoti's boyfriend even bought her an expensive condo in Toronto. But once they had a taste for luxury, the hunger would grow, and this was only the beginning for the Matharu sisters. Jyoti and Kiran have never been the types to care about what others think of them. They were born into a middle-class Indian family who migrated to Canada. Living in Toronto, their life was overall normal. While Jyoti was romantic and passionate about literature, Kiran was level-headed and excelled in math and science. The two were inseparable and always dressed up to go to school. After high school, the sisters applied to a 2-year fashion, art, and business program while working part-time jobs, sharing clothes and a car, and working to bring their fashion brand to life. At night, they spent their time at clubs, wanting to live a life inspired by Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie. At this point, they had planned on eventually finding love, having a big Indian wedding, and settling in Toronto. Then, Jyoti met her Nigerian executive boyfriend, who swept both sisters off their feet and into Nigeria. The sisters claimed it all happened so fast that there wasn't even a moment to question if everything was real. From there, they continued going to Nigeria to meet future wealthy boyfriends. "Once they find out you have a sister, it's over," said Kiran, talking about how easy it was to find men who would lavish them with riches. Taking a look at their Instagrams, their lifestyle is the definition of luxury. Brands such as Bottega Veneta, Gucci, Prada, and many more fill their closets along with accessories. They also have pictures wearing all their expensive items in their Rolls Royce driving through the streets of Dubai. They ended up with so many things that they eventually converted their Toronto condo into a walk-in closet that resembled a high-fashion boutique. There were walls lined with over 70 pairs of designer heels and glass wardrobes filled with bags and purses. They had custom rose gold jewelry and diamond watches easily worth more than a car. And did they use their own money to buy it all? No, not at all. "The only time I go shopping is when someone gives me their credit card," said Kiran, meaning these two were essentially sugar babies documenting their lives on social media. By now, they have about 80,000 followers collectively who mostly praise them for the lifestyle they live. The similarities between them and the Kardashian-Jenner family make it no surprise that the media gave these two the nickname the Canadian Kardashians. The two sisters quickly grew accustomed to their new life. Once you live with money, it's hard to go back to a life without it. And with how things were going, they would never have to. They put their dreams of a fashion brand on hold to make time for the men willing to provide for them. They even had expectations for the men they dated. They were attracted to the power, wealthy men in Nigeria and their position on the Forbes billionaire list. It didn't matter if these men had wives or children either. The tabloids loved the Canadian Kardashian sisters and claimed they were the most provocative women in Nigeria. But even provocative women have standards. These rich men would have to spoil them and fund their expensive tastes in life if they wanted to date them. It seemed like the perfect life for someone who wanted to be a sugar baby. It wasn't until their last trip to Nigeria that things took a turn for the worst. Both sisters woke up one morning, and after having a shower, they heard a loud knocking on their hotel room door. A group of men barged in, demanding that the two go to the police station for questioning. Confused and frightened, the sisters refused to go with them. You can still find the photos taken of them in their bathrobes online. Plainclothes police officers took these photos. Nothing was provided when the sisters asked them to provide proof of identification. Instead, the officers claimed that they would take them in their bathrobes if the two of them did not get dressed. In the end, they were forced to comply and taken to the station with the fear that they were being kidnapped. When they got to the police station, officers accused them of owning a popular gossip blog called Najasit Live. This site is known to spread scandalous rumors about Nigerian elites and accused the sisters of prostitution. Kieran and Jayoti denied being the owners, but the police did not believe them. From here, the officers drove them to another police station belonging to the anti-robbery squad. According to a 2016 Amnesty report, this station was known for its corruption and use of torture to extract confessions. When the two arrived, they claimed to be put into a dimly lit room while an officer demanded they sign a confession to owning the gossip site. Najasit Live was written in Nigerian Pidgin, a language neither girl spoke. When the girls refused to sign the confession, they were forced to a cell with 11 other girls and stayed overnight. The following day, they were taken to a hotel room near the airport and guarded for 18 days. They found out they were accused of threatening to kidnap and blackmail wealthy Nigerian elites, including the politically powerful oil tycoon Femi Otedola. Femi Otedola was the controlling shareholder of Forte Oil. In Nigeria, they have over 500 gas stations as well as a gas-fired power plant. In 2015, he was number 16 on Forbes' 50 richest Africans list. He was also Kieran's ex-boyfriend. The sisters claim that Otedola was angry because they rejected his advances to rekindle their relationship. Otedola then filed a request for police to find whoever owns Najasit Live, claiming they were using nude pictures to blackmail elites. Their suspects? The Canadian Kardashian sisters. While the sisters were in detention, officers brought them to Otedola's home, where, according to Jayoti and Kieran, he supposedly forced them to record a video confessing to owning the website and apologizing to him and his family. He promised that if they recorded the video, he would provide them with their passports and let them leave for Canada. After recording the video, it was uploaded to the internet, and the girls were still not given their passports back. During this time, the gossip site's Twitter was posting even though the officers confiscated the sisters' electronics. The owner even eventually took down the site in order to prove that the Matharu sisters weren't the owners. After posting bail and waiting for weeks in their room, the sisters were finally allowed to travel back to Canada with emergency travel documents claiming that their bail didn't restrict travel and that their physical safety was at risk. While back in Toronto, the two sisters stayed off of social media with hopes that the whole fiasco would die down. The media exploded with unofficial facts about the sisters, being, let's just call them ladies of the night, as well as calling them gold diggers and scammers. After seeing their names get raked through the mud, they decided they'd had it. It was time to fight back and clear their names. They posted all of their evidence along with their side of the story on their lifestyle blog, Metropolitan. They contacted City News to give a 30-minute interview discussing what they went through and their feelings toward the media. They claimed that none of the news media had reached out to get their side of the story, so Jayoti and Kieran reached out to them, threatening to sue if the companies didn't print retractions. Jayoti and Kieran knew that many backlashes came from society's tendency to frown on a woman who allows herself to be single while being lavished by men. People hated them simply because they didn't like how they lived, but the sisters didn't care what the consequences were as long as they could clear their names. And just when they thought they were in the clear, Jayoti was told by Canadian customs officials that she couldn't travel to the United States due to an arrest warrant on her passport. Meanwhile, her sister Kieran was traveling to Italy to do some furniture shopping. While waiting for her luggage, Italian customs officials locked Kieran in a room without food, water, or explanation. After 8 hours, officers finally told her that she had a flag on her passport from Interpol and that she was being placed under provisional arrest. Police officials held her for 40 days, waiting to be deported to Nigeria, but the paperwork paperwork never came. Kieran was allowed to travel back to Canada. Philip Adebowale, the Nigerian police officer who initially detained the sisters, was the one who issued the warrant for their arrest. He claimed he didn't conspire with Otedola or demand bribes, as the sisters had mentioned. When asked why they didn't send the extradition paperwork for Kieran, he blamed it on the Italian police and bureaucratic errors. When Kieran returned to Canada, the two sisters pleaded with Interpol to remove their names from the red alert list so they would be allowed to travel again. Everyone knew this to be impossible without a lawyer, but the sisters felt they could accomplish it. While waiting for Interpol, the sisters decided to let their Instagrams flourish with photos of them wearing designer items. During this time, an American man who was a follower of Jayoti reached out, asking if she would like to start a fashion company. He lived in Dubai, but since the women weren't allowed to travel, he was willing to come to them. After months of waiting and fighting, Interpol sent them a package containing a letter letting them know that Interpol had deleted their names from the list. This meant they were free to travel again and had done so without a lawyer. The American man, who they have decided to keep unnamed, booked a flight for Jayoti to come to Dubai. After a stressful and sleepless flight, she was delighted that nobody was waiting to arrest her at the airport. What started as a business meeting quickly blossomed into a romance. Again, Jayoti found herself being taken care of by a wealthy man. One night, Jayoti wore an orange dress created by Kieran. This dress mesmerized the man, who encouraged them to move to Los Angeles to start their fashion career. After all the scandals, the sisters now had the ability to realize their dream of creating a fashion brand. Now, the sisters own a clothing store called Spectrum Studio, where they sell the clothes that Kieran makes. When advising others going through a public scandal, they remind people to be the one who tells the story, be transparent that nobody is perfect, and when people ask questions, answer them. They have learned from their experience and no longer mess around with Nigerian princes. In a wild turn of events, they have turned a scandalous story into a successful business, genuinely living up to the Kardashian name. Being rich and famous isn't all fun and games. Let's get right into why it's always rule number uno: never let no one know how much dough you hold, because you know this could happen. Number 5. Rolex Rippers. The Rolex Rippers were a group of women that went to affluent areas of the UK and robbed wealthy gentlemen of their designer watches. Police caught one member, Stefania Tanika, who they arrested and later sent to prison after she robbed a guy at a country club. But Tanika was only one member of the gang, one cog in this vicious wheel of criminals. Authorities linked roughly 15 other crimes to the group, but have been unable to find enough evidence to take these women down. In July 2022, 2 women approached a man outside a veterinary office. They asked if he would fill out a survey like a totally normal day. Then, things took a turn for the worse. One of them shook his hand and pulled the old give a hug while attempting to remove his watch after he completes the survey move. But it didn't work. The man realized what was going on and bravely fended the woman off. What do we say when a terrifying survey taker tries to get your watch? Not today. Terrified, he fled the scene and called the police. The Rippers gang targeted older men, usually dressed in polo shirts, possibly because they really don't like that look. Also, their bare arms meant their Rolexes were on display, making it easier for the group to choose their targets and even remove the watches without their victims noticing. It's also noteworthy that the Rippers in this gang are not, and never have been, associated with Jesse and the Rippers. These are completely different Rippers, so for the 5 of you out there that got that reference, your memory shall remain unsullied. Retired wine merchant Derek Freestone was on his way with a friend to the Goodwood Festival of Speed motor racing event. They stopped at a pharmacy, and Freestone waited in the car. He sat in the passenger seat of his friend's Mercedes when 2 women approached him, knocking on the window and asking him to sign a petition for a deaf school, and Freestone is known to not hate deaf people or their schools, so he agreed. As he finished signing, one of the women threw her arms around him and tried to give him smooches. He was so taken aback by the unexpected smooch that he forgot there was a second lady who, at some point, was shaking his hand hand. After he pushed the woman away, he realized his gold Rolex, worth roughly $15,000, was gone. He leapt out of the car and chased the women, but they had already disappeared. Alan Bruce, another casualty of the marauding gang, was robbed the day after Freestone. He parked his Audi TT Sport when two women approached him. They asked him to sign the same petition for school. Bruce is left-handed and also wore his Yachtmaster Rolex on his left hand. One of the women said she loved his aftershave and asked him for a hug. It didn't smell good enough for smooches? It's like Alan Bruce got rejected and he didn't even know it. He put his right hand over his back pocket where he kept his wallet, but didn't think to protect his watch. He didn't know it was gone when he pushed the woman off him with his left hand. Currently, the gang have been using the same tactic to target women in wealthy areas, stealing their purses, jewelry, and wallets. The Rolex ripping duo approached a woman in her 70s asking for a donation to their charity before making it mandatory by nabbing 1,000 pounds from the woman's handbag. On the same day, elderly couple Michael and Enid Smith were approached by the same two women asking for donations. The elderly couple were forced to fight off the pair as one of the Rolex Rippers shoved Mr. Smith against his car door, unable to rip his Rolex. The incidents are frequent and widespread, and it's difficult to track down the watcher. Even though each Rolex has its own serial number, the numbers won't be looked at unless the watch is brought in to be serviced. Many wealthy men in the UK have angrily lamented the fact that they can't display their wealth as openly as they used to. How will the other rich guys at the country club know that they're rich too without a massively expensive timepiece? Life can be hard sometimes, guys. Number 4. Flashy in Ibiza. In June 2022, burglars broke into the Ibiza vacation home of Paris Saint-Germain soccer star Marco Verratti. Verratti was renting the home from Brazilian world-renowned soccer player Ronaldo. The burglars burgled cash, watches, and jewelry totaling around $3 million. The burglars entered the house early on a Sunday morning, instead of going to church like their mothers would want, when the soccer player and his family were out. While Verratti didn't post about being in Ibiza, his wife, model Jessica 80, just had to brag on social media. 80 posted photos and videos of herself in the Balearic Islands, including a bikini picture where she specifically said she was in Ibiza. Verratti wasn't the only famous person that liked a vacation in the Balearic Islands. The area attracts wealthy, affluent people looking for a vacation under the sun. Even royalty vacations there, including Prince William and Princess Kate, who frequently go to Kate's uncle's home, which is the same area as the house where Verratti was staying. Cristiano Ronaldo, who's different from the other Ronaldo, and Lionel Messi also vacationed in the area that summer, dropping up to $300,000 weekly for a rental home. Police investigated the case and arrested 6 people in connection with the robbery, suspecting they were part of a more prominent criminal gang that specialized in home robberies. Another soccer player, Dani Olmo, was robbed in June 2022 in Valencia, Spain. He was leaving a hairdresser's with his brother when a mugger tore his $28,000 Rolex off his wrist. The previous day, he posted pictures wearing the watch on Instagram. The robber's accomplice waited nearby in their getaway car. Olmo's brother tried to stop them by grabbing the vehicle as it drove away, but he couldn't hold on to it for long and suffered minor injuries from being dragged by the car. He was treated at the scene by an ambulance. Olmo reported the incident to the Spanish police. While rich and famous people visit Ibiza all the time, their wealth and status make them easy targets for burglaries and robberies, especially when they post their whereabouts and flaunt their assets on social media. Number 3. Even safes aren't safe. English soccer player Reece James's home safe was stolen after a group of robbers broke into his house in September 2021. Officers arrived at the scene after receiving reports of a residential burglary. They initially arrested 2 men in connection with the case, but released them without further action. Security camera footage caught the group in the act. At least 4 people walked up James's driveway and shined flashlights into his house. In one of the videos, the group rolled the large safe across the driveway, but struggled to open the property's electric gates with the heavy safe in tow. Reece James might have been young when the robbery occurred, but he'd already had an incredibly successful soccer career with Chelsea FC in England. His success made him wealthy, but he kept valuables that money couldn't buy in his safe. Those prizes were his medals for Euro 2020, Champions League, and Super Cup. James shared the security camera footage of the robbers on social media, appealing to his fans to help identify the individuals in the videos who made his house less safe. He told his followers that he was okay and said he was working with police, advisors, and Chelsea FC and had strong leads as to who the perpetrators were. Unfortunately, James had already dealt with being robbed. In 2020, he was at at a charity event with the Felix Project serving food to hungry children when someone broke into his car and stole charity gifts. As James left the event, he saw his car window had been smashed. He would donate the gifts later that day and took to social media to express his frustration and disappointment over the whole ordeal. Soccer players and their families are often targets of home invasion. Burglars entered Wayne Rooney's mansion in 2016, and Frank Lampard has dealt with 4 separate robberies, including a break-in in May 2020. It's easy to know when these players won't be home since their matches are so well publicized. Steven Gerrard was playing in the Champions League in 2007 against Ajax when intruders broke into his house. Ian Wright was playing in Brazil when burglars entered his home. Unfortunately, sometimes the players were home. Robbers held Tottenham midfielder Dele Alli at gunpoint when they broke into his home. An armed gang forced their way into Derby center back Phil Jagielka's home in 2009 and held him at knife point. Sounds like being rich and famous isn't always the answer. Number 2. That's fake art. Pei Shen-kin's Queen's neighbors knew something was odd about him. He was an artist who liked to dry his paintings in the sun, propping them up outside his modest home. However, he kept his windows covered, and a man in an expensive car often came to the house carrying new paintings. Surely, the man in the nice car should have been picking up art from Qin, not bringing it to him. Later, they would learn that Qin, the 73-year-old Chinese immigrant, fooled the richest people in the art world when he created dozens of works modeled after America's modernist painters. He made pieces mimicking the works of famous painters and sold them for a total of $80 million. At first, Qin struggled to sell his pieces in the US and only earned a few $1,000s for his imitation. As New York was the center of the art world, he was disheartened by how difficult it was to make a name for himself. Qin made his living selling portraits on the streets, imitating the styles of famous artists. In the early 1990s, art dealer Jose Carlos Bergantinos Diaz discovered Qin's art and recruited him to make paintings in the style of abstract expressionists. Diaz made his girlfriend, Glafira Rosales, sell the counterfeit. For the next 15 years, Qin produced over 60 paintings, imitating the signature styles of Jackson Pollock, Barnett Newman, Robert Motherwell, and Richard de Bencourt. These paintings are bad enough as it is, so it's even worse to overpay for fake versions of terrible art. It's a scam that the original pieces sold for as much as they did. Rosales claimed they were authentic pieces by the artist and were only recently discovered. She told dealers that most of the paintings came from a collector who inherited his collection from his father and that the collector refused to release his identity. The elite Manhattan art dealership Knoedler & Company sold works from Rosales for millions of dollars. They had a loyal customer base who relied on their expertise as they had been in business for over 100 years. The pieces sold for millions of dollars, with a fake Jackson Pollock going for $17 million and a Rothko abstract being sold for $8.3 million. Generally, art is part of an unregulated business, and investing in works of art is risky. No matter how much you spend on a piece, its value might not correlate to that amount, and it could be worth tens of thousands of dollars or nothing. It's not illegal to make a replica of a painting or even sign it in the name of the original artist, but it has to be clear that it's a copy. Rosales never made it clear that Qin's pieces were fake. Another trick that Qin used was to make his work look older by using tea or even dirt from a vacuum cleaner, misleading buyers into thinking the art was much older than it was. Members of the art community started raising questions about the authenticity of some of the Motherwell works that Rosales dealt with. The concerns reached the FBI, and in 2009, Rosales and Qin's scheme fell apart. Angry buyers, including fashion director Kuwaiti Shika, filed lawsuits against the dealer and demanded millions of dollars in reimbursement and damages. The reputations of people that vouched for the works were destroyed. The Knoedler Gallery faced so many lawsuits that the gallery closed in 2011 after being in business for 165 years. Federal authorities arrested Rosales, and she was held without bail due to fears that she was a flight risk. 2013, she pleaded guilty to money laundering, fraud, and tax evasion. The court ordered her to forfeit $81 million. She cooperated with authorities and received a 3-month jail sentence. Rosales said her abusive boyfriend coerced her into the scam. He was the mastermind behind the whole thing, and she only participated out of fear that he would hurt her and their daughter, as he had been violent towards them on several occasions. Diaz fled to Spain and avoided the charges awaiting him in the U.S., including a 12-count federal indictment alleging fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and false statements. His brother, who was also involved in the scheme, fled to Spain as well. Pei Shen-kin disappeared. His house was empty, and neighbors said they hadn't seen him for months. He usually spent half the year in China, but this time was different. His garden was filled with newspapers and stray cats rather than art, and he left the doors unlocked. The feds believed he was hiding in China. Qin lied in interviews about recreating the paintings and knowing Rosales. His charges were 1 count each of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and making false statements to the FBI. He faced 45 years in prison. Together, the group committed the most extensive art fraud in modern U.S. history. It lasted 15 years, made made more than $80 million, caused the demise of one of New York's oldest and most respected galleries, and scammed rich people. Number 1. Family VAT Scam. The Kopp family committed the largest UK payroll fraud of its kind, stealing over $55 million. The group consisted of Jeffrey Kopp, his son Joshua, and his brother Andrew. Together, they ran Central Payroll Specialists, known as CPS, a company they later rebranded as Quality Premier Services, or QPS. The Kopps conducted an elaborate VAT scam. VAT, or Value Added Tax, is paid when buying goods or services. For reference, the standard VAT amount in the UK is 20%. Recruitment companies use the family's business for payroll services, and QPS would issue invoices with a 20% VAT added. Although they claim their sales amounted to £20 million, or $25 million, they earned more than £250 million, or $300 million, and kept the extra VAT. Jeffrey and Joshua didn't pay any income tax between 2009 and 2015, while Andrew only paid £16,000, around $19,000. Joshua loved to show off his money and would take pictures of himself in private jets, on trips to Las Vegas, and posing with briefcases full of cash. And that's exactly why his family got caught. He wanted to brag about how much money he had. What did Biggie say rule numero uno was at the beginning of this video? Joshua caught the authorities' attention when he showed some of those flashy pics to a prison inmate. It seems like prison inmates will definitely pass along information if it benefits them in the end. Joshua spent his money on a $5 million home, and he drove Bentleys worth over $360,000. He registered 9 cars in his name, including a Ferrari, Lamborghini, and a Rolls Royce. Between 2014 and 2015, Joshua transferred $11 million from the CPS and QPS accounts into his own personal account. His mansion was filled with luxury items like gold and jeweled watches and designer clothing. Joshua loved high-end department stores like Selfridges and Harrods, where he spent hundreds of thousands of pounds. Detectives searched his phone and learned the true origins of his wealth. He had pictures of a notepad with calculations explaining how the VAT fraud worked and how it was split between him, his father, and his uncle. Joshua's father, Jeffrey, lived just as lavishly as his son. He owned multiple mansions, 4 in the UK and 1 in Malaga, Spain. He had his own racing horse that he paid roughly $145,000 for training and stabling. Jeffrey traveled mainly by private jet and dropped $360,000 on private flights to Malaga and other places between July 2014 and January 2015. He hid £55,000 in cash in his London home, breaking it up and keeping it in various places, including inside his Bentley, likely the last place a criminal would look for something valuable. Andrew Kopp was also a big spender. He owned 8 homes, 6 he bought in cash, including one in Malaga alongside his brother. His car collection included a Range Rover, Lamborghini, and Bentley. He had several Rolex watches and collected works of art. Britain was suffering financially at the time, and the $55 million that the three were burning through could have eased that burden. Even worse, they barely paid their own taxes for many years. Police arrested them in May 2015 and confiscated as much of their cash and assets as possible. Not even the arrest slowed Joshua down. He traveled to Miami in June 2015 and came home with hundreds of thousands of pounds of jewelry, watches, and cash. In 2017, a court found the trio guilty of conspiracy to cheat the public revenue and money laundering. The three pledged their innocence, claiming they didn't know about a VAT debt as they left all of that up to their accountant. That sounds like a cop-out to us. A judge sentenced Jeffrey to 10 years in prison, Andrew to 9 years, and Joshua to 8 years. Family members in the court cried when they received their sentences. The judge also banned Jeffrey from running a company for 15 years, Andrew from running one in 10, and Joshua for 8. Sandy Jenkins spent years saving up for a new car and was still nowhere near his goal. The accountant currently working at Collins Street Bakery was staring at his computer screen at the blank spaces on his company's checks when inspiration hit him. On a whim, he drove to the Dallas Lexus dealership and bought a gold Lexus sedan with a tan leather interior. Although he sold his old Lexus as a down payment, he couldn't afford the monthly cost of his new vehicle. But he had a plan and swiped his card. Sandy drove home blasting music as he flew down the highway. He was sure people were looking at him in envy, and when he got home, he told his wife that the car was a gift from the Fishers, a couple he'd been helping with their accounting. According to an article in Texas Monthly, a few weeks later, his credit card payment was due. He checked to see that nobody was looking as he entered a $20,000 check in the accounting software payable to CitiCard. Sandy printed the check, which automatically added CEO Bob McNutt's signature, then voided it in the system so there would be no record. Sandy then took the check and paid off his car. He smiled to himself. This was going to be fun. Sandy Jenkins was a shy accountant who was tired of feeling unnoticed. Every morning, he awoke before his alarm, made a strong cup of coffee, had breakfast with his wife, and watched Good Morning America. He spent his 10-minute morning commute daydreaming about the life of luxury he never had. Sandy worked at the Collins Street Bakery, where he felt invisible. He silently admired Bob McNutt, the beloved CEO who ran the bakery. Coworkers only visited Sandy to talk about payroll reports, sales reports, and other administrative work, but they sure loved talking to Bob. Sandy had worked at the bakery for 6 years and still needed to save up money to buy the upgraded Lexus he wanted. Sandy and his wife Kay might not have been wealthy, but they lived a good life. They had refined tastes and lived in a nice neighborhood. Their home was well kept, and neighbors commented on their manicured front yard. Sandy spent his evenings with his wife, who would cook while he played classical music on the piano. Sandy's shyness defined most of his social interactions, stemming back to his school days. He was quiet and only had a few friends, and worked at his family's grocery store after school and on weekends. Accounting wasn't Sandy's first passion. He wanted to work as a funeral director, but that's not exactly what drew him to the career. Funeral directors wore sharp outfits, drove immaculate black cars, were eloquent, and worked in the rich backdrops of funeral homes. When Sandy told his father about his dream occupation, his dad discouraged him and suggested he go for a more mainstream career. Sandy decided to get a degree in business administration from Dallas Baptist University. He met Kay at the college after a family friend told him about her niece, who occasionally needed a ride to campus. Sandy picked Kay up from her aunt's house, and the two drove to class together. He couldn't believe his luck and eventually persuaded her to marry him. Jenkins' first job out of college was as an accounting clerk at a utility company in Fairfield, but he was much more interested in living in Corsicana. They moved to the wealthy town when Jenkins' company transferred him close enough. People in Corsicana loved to gossip, making it a place where everybody was in on one another's business. When the Jenkins arrived in 1988, they had some catching up to do. And how were they ever going to get in with the upper crust of Corsicana society? A few years after settling in the town, struggling to make ends meet, and spending a lot of time volunteering at their church, Sandy landed a job at the most famous employer around. Collins Street Bakery sold premier fruitcakes, and since Sandy loved fruitcakes, it was the perfect fit. Not only was the bakery the best-known business in Corsicana, but it was the world's most renowned purveyor of fruitcakes. Bob McNutt ran the bakery, which had been in his family for generations. He'd recently expanded it, opening storefronts in places like Waco, Lindale, and Greenville. Sandy joined the company as an accounts payable and payroll supervisor in the same year as the expansion. He made $25,000 a year and had spent $1,000 of the bakery's money on an antique desk reproduction for his new office. Sandy was one of the company's top performers and transitioned the bakery from a manual accounting system to a computerized one. His supervisor raved about Jenkins' hard work and how he completed every task on time. In 2000, Sandy received a promotion to corporate controller. The Jenkinses did well for themselves. Sandy had a good job, they'd raised a daughter, attended church, and were contributing community members. But their accomplishments were meaningless in a town that noticed everything one another did. And in a place that only cared about money and familial wealth, couple never truly fit in. Despite the promotion, Sandy dreamed of making more money. He had big plans, like joining the Corsicana Country Club, a gourmet group, or a wine society. Everyone who was anyone belonged to a supper club, many going back for generations. The Jenkins weren't members of fancy clubs. They were the people that made food down at the church. People in Corsicana only noticed that the couple didn't wear the right name brand clothing and that Kay didn't look after herself and get plastic surgery like the other women. Despite all his hard work, Sandy was still an outsider looking in. He wanted a change. Everyone in town was loaded, but Sandy was doing the work of 3 people and feeling as though his employer barely paid him anything. He was tired of waiting to live out his dreams, and his present job wasn't wasn't really doing much to get him there. One day, Sandy helped himself to some of the bakery's petty cash. It wasn't a lot, but enough to stress him out if someone noticed. Except, nobody did notice. He dreaded the moment someone would enter his office and ask where the cash went, but that day never came. So, he decided to drive to the Lexus dealer and purchase the newer gold model he had dreamed about. After the day when Sandy paid his credit card bill with a $20,000 check from the bakery, he was hooked. He waited until he was confident that nobody noticed the first fraudulent check. He went on to repeat his scheme. Kay and Sandy were soon spending $98,000 on their credit card, paid for by Collins Street Bakery. They remodeled their kitchen into the perfect entertaining space with high-end appliances, cooling and warming drawers, and granite countertops. The couple hosted elaborate dinner parties where they opened $100 bottles of wine and served steaks and veal chops. They joined multiple supper clubs, hosted champagne brunches, and fully integrated with Corsicana's exclusive social scene. Part of fitting in was looking the part. Although Sandy told people at work that he bought his outfits from Walmart, he was actually wearing $600 from designer brands like Armani and Hermes. He filled his closet with expensive shoes like Ferragamos and Gucci's, and had a personal shopper at Neiman Marcus. Sandy was also obsessed with expensive watches. He'd always admired them at Neiman Marcus, and in December 2006, he purchased 5 Rolexes worth $52,765, a little over his current annual salary. The home in Corsicana also wasn't enough anymore. When Sandy was on a trip to Santa Fe, he bought a $658,000 4-bedroom adobe house. Sandy and Kay invited their upper-class friends from Corsicana to visit, sending them on a private jet and treating them to expensive wines and dinners. And Santa Fe wasn't their only vacation spot. They also traveled by jet to Aspen, Napa, and Martha's Vineyard. A year after the first fraudulent check, Sandy had taken 43 private flights costing $500,000. However, he told anyone who asked that he had a generous cousin who loaned him planes. It was only a matter of time before the town started talking. Sandy's sudden change in financial status was obvious in a town that loved gossip. The couple got ahead of rumors by telling people around town they had inherited money, although sometimes their stories were inconsistent. By this point, the gold Lexus was long gone, and the couple kept purchasing the newest Lexus, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz models. Sandy told a coworker he was a car trader, but mentioned to others that the same cousin who loaned him planes also let him borrow cars. Kay knew that Sandy didn't have a cousin with a private jet. She quit her job shortly after he sent the first check, but made efforts to keep extravagant purchases discreet. Kay ordered a 2-seat Lexus convertible in peacock blue, the same color as her previous car, so as not to draw too much attention. When it arrived in midnight blue instead, she sent it back. But she couldn't stop neighbors from noticing the flashy cars in the driveway. Back at the bakery, Bob McNutt didn't understand why the bakery wasn't profitable. He feared they'd expanded too quickly, but couldn't find a specific part of the business that was losing money. To identify the issue, McNutt examined their expenses, looking into labor, inventory, payroll, and more. He didn't realize Sandy had timed his checks so well that he was undetectable. Sandy knew when the bakery was making large purchases for things like ingredients and would pad those expense areas. Since those expenses would typically be high, nothing would seem off when the bakery ran its marketing analysis. Sandy's social climb was as safe as it could be. Kay wasn't as good at mingling with the town socialites as she wanted to be. She often asked awkward questions, like inquiring how much money she would need to fit into Corsicana society. Despite their unusual social interactions, the couple enjoyed their new luxurious life. They preferred only the best food and drink, enjoying bottles of expensive champagne and dining on Petrosian caviar. They were jetting off to Santa Fe, Napa, or Martha's Vineyard when they weren't entertaining. They took over 223 trips on private jets, with their travel costs exceeding $3.3 million. Sandy's splurges grew even more extravagant, with him purchasing a $7,200 cell phone, a $58,000 Steinway piano, and a $40,000 horsehair mattress. The couple no longer went to church, as they felt the parishioners were still treating them as mere kitchen workers. Instead, Kay became the treasurer of the Quintillion Book Club, and Sandy joined a wine club. The couple was living the dream. Sandy felt invincible. Other people might have been paranoid about getting caught, but he never considered cashing out. Sandy Jenkins was no longer invisible, and that was all that mattered. In June 2013, Symmetric Walker, a new hire in accounting, came into Sandy's office. She found a check made out to Capital One and was confused, as the bakery didn't have accounts or credit cards with Capital One. She asked Sandy to help her understand it, and he said he'd look into it. He hoped panic didn't show on his face, but it did. Symmetric had a gut feeling about Sandy and snuck into his office when he was out for the afternoon. She looked through the voided check register and immediately found 11 discrepancies that were worth $400,000. She reported him to the upper-level executives, who were ready to confront him the next day at work. Sandy's boss showed him the voided checks and asked for an explanation. At first, Sandy shrugged it off, acting like he'd done nothing wrong. But Sandy wasn't good on his feet and couldn't offer a logical explanation, other than to say that he wrote checks for the bakery, a response that made almost no sense. So they fired him, and he fled. He rushed home, taking 2 grocery bags from the kitchen and filling them with handfuls of valuable items from throughout the house, like watches, jewelry, and gold bars. He got in one of his cars with Kay, and they raced out of town. When Collins Street Bakery spoke about Sandy's 9 years of embezzlement, they claimed that a company of their age often saw fluctuations in growth, with some years better than others. The bakery was having troubles at the time as customers' views of their chief and most popular product, fruitcake, were changing for the worse. Leadership was busy worrying about overcoming the public's growing distaste for fruitcake and finding ways to generate new interest in it. They were preoccupied with marketing and advertising efforts. Sandy covered his tracks by manipulating the books to make it look like the profit decrease was due to a marketing campaign failure. He was the person that approved claims and signed the checks, meaning nobody was checking his work. The more the company spent on marketing, easier it was for Sandy to embezzle. When leadership finally confronted him about the voided checks, Sandy had embezzled $16.7 million, with $16,649,786 in checks and $114,342 in cash. The incremental amounts Sandy took weren't enough to damage the bakery's immediate profits. Even though senior management knew they were losing money, they never thought to look at anyone but themselves. The news didn't hit the town until a month later, when the FBI showed up at the Jenkins home. The town flocked to the property to see a swarm of cars and officers searching the house. Locals gathered around to gossip and watch a tow truck arrive for the couple's multiple vehicles, and officers carried out boxes of furs, wine, and other high-end items. Sandy and his wife, who were definitely no longer invisible, were still out of town. Sandy had gathered his jewelry, dumped it in a Whole Foods bag, and frantically scattered it behind trees, bushes, and rocks at a local park. He also ditched his luxury watches and gold bars, hiding some in the bushes and dumping the rest in a lake. However, an off-duty police officer just happened to stumble across $250,000 of the luxury items. Federal authorities sent a scuba team to search the lake, and the FBI linked the items' serial numbers to Sandy's record. The FBI knocked on the Jenkins doors a few days later and indicted him on counts of money laundering, mail fraud, other related offenses. The couple hadn't just stolen checks and cash. They ran up $11 million in charges on American Express card. The Jenkins estate sale was a big event in Corsicana. People started lining up at the house hours before the doors opened. Organizers let guests enter in small groups to see the Jenkins extravagance in person. The house had designer handbags, wallets, luggage, briefcases, collector pens, jewelry, and more. Bob McNutt handed out Collins Street Bakery treats to everyone in line, encouraging them to spend as much money as possible when they got inside. He needed to make back his $17 million, and the sale was his best shot. Everyone speculated about Sandy's motivation, and the gossip didn't stop. Some said he was bitter that Bob had the life Sandy dreamed of, while others believed he just wanted to feel like a big shot. The conclusion was that Sandy and Kay wanted to be a part of Corsicana society, but needed more money. Despite his efforts, Sandy couldn't spare Kay from punishment, though her sentence was far more lenient than his. Sandy received 10 years in a federal detention facility, and Kay got 5 years probation. Sandy's prison routine returned to something similar to his life before the embezzlement. He woke up, drank his coffee, and ate breakfast while watching Good Morning America, but instead of dreaming about an extravagant and social future, he reminisced about his past luxurious life. Sandy passed away in 2019, 4 years into his 10-year sentence. Back in 2020, FBI agents waited out a suspect in a $35 million Ponzi scheme, Matthew Piercy, while he hid in California's Lake Shasta. The accused faced a mountain of charges, including 31 felony counts, when he was finally brought in. The action began in the relatively calm city of Redding in Northern California. The scammer led authorities on a vehicle chase through the streets of Redding. The action picked up speed and started to get reckless. While still on busy local streets, Piercy ran off the road twice with his pursuers in tow. The chase didn't begin and end in Redding. Piercy made a bold play for Interstate 5 and headed north. The chase eventually reached Lake Shasta. When the determined man hopped out of his truck, he grabbed something from the vehicle, a point in police chases that usually doesn't end well. The object turned out to be a Yamaha 350 Li underwater scooter. Rather than making that cliched last stand, it seemed the scammer was ready to try a legitimate career in scuba diving. Piercy swam into the massive artificial canal where he stayed for 25 minutes using the scooter to go further and faster than any human swimmer. What's even crazier is this all happened in the winter. Temperatures for the area typically hovered in the area of 30 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. He might have lasted longer if it wasn't so cold. But it wouldn't have mattered. Cops had a helicopter positioned over the lake to see the crazy escape play out. When the chilled culprit finally crawled out, feds nabbed him straight away. Before taking him downtown, they were nice enough to give him a dry change of clothes provided by his wife. They even had their medical team give him a once-over to ensure he was okay before throwing the book at him. The dust in Piercy's case has yet to settle as of 2022, but official records speculate that he may get a life sentence. Piercy ran the scam that got him chased into Lake Shasta through two different shell companies, each with its own function and clientele. The two companies, of course, had several things in common. The most prominent items on the list were that they centered on wealth management and that the money they were supposed to be investing and growing went directly into Piercy's pockets. One of the two companies was known as Family Wealth Legacy, and its intended purpose is what it says on the tin. The company targeted those who were already wealthy, but looking to get richer to give future family members a head start. This is actually a pretty tame premise for wealth management and investment firms, but Piercy and his associates put a somewhat different spin on things. With a $50,000 minimum investment in the mix, the bold and risky play paid off. Until it didn't. The other company was the more contemporary Zola. This everyman's investment firm didn't target any particular audience or boast a lofty minimum like Family Wealth Legacy. Instead, the firm branched into several investment channels such as loans and real estate. There wasn't really a target audience in mind. Common folk were targeted just as gleefully as banks and even the federal government. Their joint PR efforts were the biggest uniting factor in how the two companies were run. Both were said to use an AI-based trading system for moving investments around. Termed the Up-Vesting Fund, this tool was supposed to use an algorithm that examined Wall Street patterns to get guaranteed returns. For about 5 years, this lie would be the primary vehicle driving Piercy's scams. While Zola and Family Wealth Legacy were the stars of the show, a third company came into play late in the game. In 2019, long after he had discovered that he was being investigated, Piercy used false credentials to start a third shell company. On paper, this company was some sort of medical outfit operating out of Reading. In reality, it was a front for laundering funds from the two other businesses. Between those three companies, Piercy pulled down some $35 million from 2015 to 2020 when he was finally brought to justice. The scam also crossed state lines, and he started at his family's law firm in Illinois, where Family Wealth Legacy was founded. The feds eventually slapped the company with an order to cease operations, but it seemed that order went ignored. Additionally, Family Wealth Management and all of its various branches all held Delaware business licenses regardless of where they operated. The answer to how Piercy and his people made $35 million appear from thin air is actually quite simple. They started by getting in some initial investments, lying to their investors, and using early money to pay them back. They ran a textbook Ponzi scheme. But like every Ponzi scheme, the money eventually dries up. It's definitely worth noting that Piercy couldn't always keep up the facade. On many occasions, investors let him know they had enough, and he almost always had a clever response. Many victims believed their money was tied up and that reporting the company would violate their signed contract. These all came back to bite Piercy as extra charges for witness tampering. The money that disappeared off the top went to a wide range of personal affairs. Piercy bought 2 houses and paid off some credit cards. He also used the money to cover operational expenses for the 2 major shell companies. Naturally, this included paying dividends and withdrawals to customers. One of the more curious items was $1,195 spent on a Yamaha Model 350 LIC scooter. Many people don't think about single-man underwater propulsion systems very often. They're usually relegated to fictional curiosities like the gadget in the PlayStation game Ape Escape. They are, however, an authentic category of hardware. In that market, Yamaha has a strong position with multiple models. One of those, sitting near the top of the heap, is the 350 Li that was used in this crazy escape. Its nearly $1,200 price tag puts the 350 Li firmly in the top end of the market. In fact, many top picks from reliable publications come in at around half the price. That money gets you a scooter that can move up to 4 miles per hour in water and run for about 75 minutes on a single charge. Compared to contemporaries in the field, this one is definitely head and shoulders above the rest. Even so, it wasn't enough to help Piercy. The feds reported that Piercy entered Lake Shasta and stayed there for about 25 minutes. There were multiple instances where authorities couldn't make visual contact with Piercy and had to track him by the bubbles rising from the water. No details were provided as to how he may have been breathing underwater, if that was the case at all. One source says that a well-trained person could hold their breath without special preparations for about 11 minutes at a stretch. Bear in mind that the average person can barely surpass a minute. This feat requires serious training and conditioning. Genetics also plays a role, as does preparation. After inhaling pure oxygen, a Spanish diver once stayed down for just over 24 minutes. Even assuming that Piercy was a stellar swimmer with a talent for holding his breath, or had some breathing equipment with him, his chances of making it across were slim. Lake Shasta is roughly 35 miles on its longest side. At the pace of the Yamaha machine, he would have taken some 9 hours to get across. By then, his scooter's battery would be dead, and the police would have driven around to the other side. And don't forget about hypothermia. Sometime in 2018, Piercy found out that he was under investigation. Any honest business owner would have gathered any evidence of legitimacy they had and come forward. Piercy did the exact opposite. Keeping transparency to a minimum was the standard for Piercy, and that didn't change when he came under scrutiny. In fact, he got even bolder. He sent a letter to then President of the United States, Donald Trump, championing Zola as the troubled banking industry's salvation. He even tried to get investors to join it. While this was all before the devastation that the COVID-19 pandemic wrought on the global economy, the United States wasn't exactly breaking fiscal records that year. Wall Street was a cautiously optimistic place around that time, so Piercy's proposed plan probably wouldn't have gone over too well. Not that trying to scam the entire United States government is a better plan. He would later point to this letter as the reason subpoenas were going out to staff and investors, hiding the real focus of the investigation. The Book of Proverbs in the King James Bible says, "A fool and his money are soon parted." This biblical saying became apparent in Piercy's dealings with the infamous Bethel Church, a megachurch out of Reading. It's a wealthy church with over 11,000 mostly wealthy members. The twist here is that they believe very strongly that God still does miracles these days, and that's what Piercy used to get into the congregation's wallets. As a church member, Piercy had some influence on the inside. He began injecting Judeo-Christian platitudes into his businesses. His appeals definitely didn't fall on deaf ears. Church members began investing in droves, forming the bulk of his income for the two businesses at one point. None of them knew they had been taken in until it all blew up in 2020. This is even more embarrassing because it's not Bethel Church's first rodeo. The congregation has seen a similar scam in the not-too-distant past. In 2016, a man named David Arnold Souza began scamming church members. Taking advantage of their faith, and allegedly their advanced age in some cases, Souza told members that he knew how to work the stock market. He proceeded to fleece about $650,000 from the church at large. The money went to dental work, travel, gym membership, and a rental Cadillac costing a cool $1,800 a month. He ultimately ended up netting an 18-year sentence for his scheming and was ordered to pay back about $520,000 to his victims. He won't be eligible for parole until he served at least 9 years of that sentence. Kenneth Winton of Oroville started out as just another person scammed. Piercy pulled him in and had him throwing money into the pot. At some point, though, things changed. Piercy invited Winton to come aboard and help him manage Zola. Before long, the two were thick as thieves. Winton was in on the scam. Winton's time at Zola started as a token role in customer service. He took on angry clients and did all he could to keep them from going to the cops with the whole thing, keeping up the appearance of a successful finance company. By 2019, he was appointed the CEO of Zola and had a hand in operating family wealth legacy. In 2020, not long before things hit the fan, Piercy handed Zola over to Winton and let him handle it as the owner. Winton ended up pleading guilty, with sentencing set for February of 2021. Details on what happened to him aren't easily available, but he faced almost 20 years in jail. He'd also have to pay a $250,000 fine. Piercy, the man at the center of it all, still seems to be awaiting sentencing. Available records don't indicate any entry of a plea at the moment either. In any case, things aren't looking good for the engineer of family wealth legacy. With 31 felony counts hanging over his head, Piercy's chance of avoiding prison time are extremely low. Some of his charges carry standard penalties of 20 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. This will, of course, be in addition to any ordered reparations. With Piercy's accounts mostly drained, officials will have difficulty figuring out how to pay back victims. Piercy himself is most likely in for a life sentence, according to court documents. In July 2021, Kasai Al-Jundi posted several TikTok videos of himself dancing in the driveway of a $1.6 million home in London. In the videos, he was wearing expensive new clothes. His friend, Mohammed El Aboud, joined in and filmed himself showing off the 3-bedroom house as though it were his own. But it wasn't their house, and the two men had just murdered the house's owner the day before. Kasai Al-Jundi wanted everyone to think he was wealthy and living an extravagant lifestyle. However, the truth was he was flat broke and needed to find a way to make himself rich. Al-Jundi was a cook at a kebab shop who'd befriended Louise Cam, a wealthy businesswoman in her 70s who owned multiple properties in the area. Mohammed El Aboud was a delivery driver who had recently arrived in the UK. Like most things on TikTok, the lifestyle videos the men posted were not reality. The property they were filming was not theirs, but instead belonged to Cam. Surveillance footage caught the pair leaving the kebab shop where Al-Jundi worked carrying a stack of cleaning products. More footage with El Aboud moving Cam's BMW out of her driveway surfaced. Al-Jundi and El Aboud had met Cam at her rental property in North London under the pretense they were going to buy the house. Cam arrived in her BMW expecting a lawyer to be present to finalize the sale, as Al-Jundi convinced her he would be paying for the house in cash. But there was no lawyer present when she arrived, so Cam refused to go through with the sale without one. Al-Jundi and El Aboud then overpowered her and forced her to sign over her power of attorney. The exchange turned deadly when one of the men attacked her from behind, ending her life. Cam's son reported Louise missing in July 2021. Her family had been concerned about strange text messages from Louise's phone claiming that she had unexpectedly returned to China. Cam's son knew the texts weren't written the way his mother spoke, and he didn't understand why she would abruptly leave without telling anybody. Al-Jundi was the one contacting them, trying to cover up his and El Aboud's actions. However, the pair couldn't resist the temptation to flaunt Cam's expensive home on social media. Police searched for Cam, but their hopes of finding her alive ended when they eventually discovered her body in a trash can. At that point, the missing persons inquiry turned into a homicide investigation. Al-Jundi and El Aboud had tried to make it look like Cam had left the country, but the videos of them at her home were too incriminating for the authorities to ignore. Al-Jundi thought he would be able to sign over all of Cam's wealth to himself through the power of attorney, including her two properties. He thought their crimes would make him rich and lured El Aboud in by promising him a share if he helped commit the deed. According to Al-Jundi's social media presence, he was a millionaire with a string of beautiful girlfriends. However, the truth was that he was a broke cook working in a kebab shop and had a wife and 3 children. Louise Cam also wasn't the first woman he'd conned. He would charm his victims by convincing them he was in love with them, and once Al-Jundi had their trust, he would take what he could. One of his victims was in her 60s, and after declaring his undying love for her, he stole her 2 cars. Al-Jundi fed Cam the same lines, telling her he was in love with her with the hopes he would sign over the properties to him. He spent months building a relationship with his victim until she completely trusted him. It was a trust that cost her her life. Cam was divorced and owned a business property and several apartments near Al-Jundi's restaurant. She owned those properties outright, but had a mortgage on the home she thought Al-Jundi was going to buy from her. Al-Jundi offered her $7.3 million for her properties, which was above the market value, making the offer too sweet to pass up. She wanted to sell so that she could give the money to her children. Al-Jundi told Cam his backer was a woman named Anna. Cam even received voice note messages that she believed were from Anna. The Anna Al-Jundi referred to was Anna Wright, another victim in his romance scams and a customer at his restaurant. Al-Jundi would send her messages proclaiming his undying love for her and claiming that there was nobody else in his life but her. Reich later admitted to being psychologically manipulated by the fraudster. Reich had eventually agreed to sell him her Toyota RAV4 and Audi TT, which were worth around $70,000. She handed the cars over to Al-Jundi, but he never gave her a penny. Reich planned on ending all contact with him once she had the money, but he always managed to avoid any kind of payment. Al-Jundi now needed Reich to be a part of his operation against Cam, but when he asked her to attend meetings as an interpreter, she refused. Cam was so convinced Al-Jundi was going to buy her rental property that she had already given him the keys. Al-Jundi handed them over to El Aboud so he could move in. Al-Jundi promised El Aboud a fortune and enticed him by letting him have Reich's Audi TT. At the time, El Aboud had only been in the UK for a few months and didn't yet have a work visa. He was working as a delivery driver and a warehouse worker for Disney, so the opportunity to acquire a new car and a nice place to live was a no-brainer. During their trial, El Aboud had claimed Al-Jundi tricked him. He claimed Al-Jundi told him that if El Aboud got rid of Cam, he would get a share of the money. Al-Jundi's actual girlfriend was a Romanian model named Maria Amarutke. She was dating him at the time of the crime and was at the house with Al-Jundi and El Aboud the day they met with Cam. Al-Jundi celebrated his unspeakable actions by taking Amarutke to a jeweler and buying her $700 earrings within hours of the crime. The shopping trip wasn't just about treating his girlfriend. Al-Jundi needed an alibi, and receipts from their transactions and surveillance camera footage would give him that. When El Aboud drove his girlfriend home that night, he confessed to her what he'd done to Cam. He explained it was over a business disagreement between Al-Jundi and Cam, and he couldn't believe what they'd done. El Aboud claimed to her that Al-Jundi made him commit the crime. Cam's family grew more and more concerned when they didn't hear from her. Al-Jundi had kept Cam's cell phone and bank cards to make it seem like she was still alive, furthering the confusion. Al-Jundi sent them messages from her phone, pretending to be Cam, and said she had decided to go back to China. Her family members responded with questions that went unanswered, and were left with no clue as to what had actually happened to her. Al-Jundi also sold Cam's car to unsuspecting buyers and used the proceeds to buy new clothes. Al-Jundi then filmed his videos for TikTok, where he danced in Cam's driveway, pretending her house was his own, and showing no remorse for his or El Aboud's action. Together, Al-Jundi and El Aboud moved Cam into a trash can that Al-Jundi arranged to have delivered to his family home. Party ended 3 days later when police found Cam's lifeless body at Al-Jundi's house. The pair planned for it to be picked up by a garbage truck and taken to a landfill where it probably would have never been recovered, making it nearly impossible for the crime to be traced back to them. But the body was found, and authorities promptly arrested Al-Jundi and El Aboud. Both denied their involvement in Cam's death, despite last being seen alive on a video feed entering the North London property where she was ambushed. There was no footage of her ever leaving the house. With El Aboud living at the house and Al-Jundi arriving shortly after Cam, they were clearly involved. During their trial, the prosecution accused them of preying on an older woman in an attempt to plunder her life savings. Prosecution highlighted how Al-Jundi deceived Cam by making her believe he would pay her huge sums of money in exchange for her properties. He forced her into signing paperwork connected to the sale and manipulated her to have her sign a power of attorney form that could have left him in control of her finances. When he texted her relatives to say she'd moved to China after selling some of her properties, they knew something was wrong. None of them ever believed they were speaking to Cam. Some of Cam's friends questioned Al-Jundi about where she was, to which he claimed she had deceived him and left the country with his money. Al-Jundi further alleged that Cam had defrauded him of close to $16 million. The prosecution quickly dismissed his accusations, as Al-Jundi had barely any money in his account, and since he worked as a cook at a kebab shop, he clearly didn't have millions of dollars to steal. Both defendants spoke through Arabic translators, though it was clear from the nature of his actions that Al-Jundi spoke fluent English. Al-Jundi blamed El Aboud, saying he was the one that committed the deed, and asked Al-Jundi to help him with the cover-up. Amiraqui also testified that El Aboud had confessed to her that he was the one who committed the act. However, when El Aboud took the witness box, he told a very different story. He told the court he was sick the day of the crime and was asleep in an upstairs bedroom. According to him, he didn't wake up until after Al-Jundi and his girlfriend left. Supposedly, when El Aboud went downstairs to find Cam lying in the living room, he was so shocked and frightened, he burst into tears. He claimed Al-Jundi called him, and El Aboud demanded to know what he had done to the woman. El Aboud testified he threatened to go to the police, but Al-Jundi shouted at him he could barely speak English and had no home, money, or family in the UK. Amarikwa contradicted his statements and said she never heard any shouting, as she was present during the conversation. She also denied the nature of her relationship with Al-Jundi, claiming they were not romantically involved. Amarikwa knew Al-Jundi was attracted to her and told her he wanted to get married and have children together, though she wasn't as interested in that kind of future with him. She referred to him as her king and faced accusations in court that she led him on because she thought he had money. Amarikwa was staying at the house on the ill-fated day when Cam entered to complete a business transaction. She claimed she had seen Cam in the living room, sitting on a sofa, before she left that day with Al-Jundi. Despite their best attempts at incriminating one another, neither man could escape justice. The court found them both guilty of ending the life of 71-year-old Louise Cam, and each received a life sentence in prison with a minimum term of 35 years. Al-Jundi and El Aboud still denied their involvement in what happened to Cam, even after they were both convicted. Love him or hate him, it's clear that former U.S. President Donald Trump rewrote the rules regarding how a commander-in-chief should behave in the White House. For Lawrence Luau Malong Yor Jr., Trump was a role model in his pursuit of riches and political power. Lawrence is the stepson of a former military leader in South Sudan and claimed that he made billions of dollars on his own, even though most of the country's residents live in extreme poverty. Even as the nation remained involved in seemingly endless war and struggled to provide enough food for its population, Lawrence flaunted his wealth in some flashy ways. At one point, he uploaded a video to Facebook that showed him tossing around $100 bills strewn across a bed. He indicated that the total amount of cash topped $1 million and described his location being at a presidential suite at an expensive hotel. However, he did not specify what city he was in. Aside from merely showing off his cash collection, Lawrence, or Young Tycoon as he calls himself, insisted that he was a generous philanthropist. He said he donated millions of dollars to organizations including the Red Cross in Kenya and South Sudan. Among the other recipients of seven-figure donations he claimed were churches across the region. Of course, representatives of these groups provided an entirely different story. John Mayom of the South Sudan Red Cross asserted that he knew nothing of any such donation, saying they were following up on this misleading and malicious claim. As for conspicuous consumption and shameless display of wealth, Lawrence made it clear that he didn't think it was so wrong. In fact, he described himself as a die-hard Trump supporter and pointed to the former president as a shining example of someone who's not ashamed of his massive bank account. Calling his hero the world's greatest president and the world's greatest man, Lawrence said that Trump is, quote, someone who likes to show off that he's rich. In that respect, Lawrence said the two men have something in common, believing he's just like the Donald. Before exploring the scope of his daring scheme, let's look at Lawrence's background and the events that led him to a life of luxury at the expense of his suffering countrymen. As the stepson of a mighty army general with close ties to South Sudan President Salva Kiir, Lawrence was given plenty of opportunities to skim money out of the government's coffers to fund his lavish spending habits. Nevertheless, he repeatedly assured critics that his immense wealth was in no way due to his family's political connections. Instead, he attempted to portray himself as a brilliant entrepreneur who was able to amass a fortune based only on his own intelligence and hard work. That depiction of himself seemed unbelievable on its face since he had no known background in business. His behavior raised plenty of red flags, but he wasn't the first in his influential family to face severe accusations of wrongdoing. His stepfather, Paul Malong Awan, served as the military's chief of staff and allegedly used his position to carry out atrocities of all types. In addition to commanding the military to commit brutal and violent acts, the United Nations claimed that the general also forced children to fight alongside adults in the army throughout a years-long civil war. Lawrence was born in 1988, and his mother married Malong a few years later after his biological father's passing. This set the boy up for a privileged life with a nation that offered few opportunities to rise out of crippling poverty. His family moved away during his childhood, but he was considered a member of South Sudan's elite upon moving back. In addition to posing for photos with the president and other top officials, Lawrence was given the cushy government job of reaching out to foreign investors interested in launching diamond, gold, or oil excavation efforts. His position allowed him to travel around the world on the government's dime while adding expensive new items to his massive collection of luxury toys. Despite presenting himself as a billionaire tycoon, Lawrence simultaneously crafted the persona of a selfless public servant. He claimed that all of his efforts to make himself rich were also part of a plan to bring new jobs into South Sudan. While the nation sank deeper into the grips of war, Lawrence insisted that he only wanted to allow the citizens to lay down their weapons and earn an honest living. As it turns out, there wasn't much about his behavior that could be described as honest. He repeatedly denied accusations that he only got rich because of his family's connections. Instead, he said he was, quote, blessed by Jesus Christ, and promised ordinary citizens they could reach the same level of success. At one point, Lawrence insisted that his family name didn't make any difference. He was a businessman, and that's all there was to it. Although he tried to paint himself as a savior for the citizens of South Sudan, his social media presence offered a different perspective. He posted Facebook pictures and videos that showed him next to private jets, luxury vehicles, and almost any other conceivable symbol of extreme wealth. Lawrence insisted that he didn't use his Facebook profile to flaunt his money and possessions when confronted with the apparent inconsistency. He didn't want to be a wealthy man, he just wanted to help his people through his Facebook. Wow, how noble. He often referred to himself using some favorite nicknames along with his staged social media posts. In addition to frequently calling himself Young Tycoon, Lawrence also posted a picture of himself flying first class and referred to himself as Smart Boy for life. Flying business class, or coach, he argued, would negatively impact his ability to attract high-rolling investors. Flying economy wouldn't attract the people he needed to win over. Therefore, it's first class or nothing. While he was living the life of a pampered globetrotter, the people back home in South Sudan were embroiled in a disastrous military conflict and a lack of necessities, including food and clean water. A thorough investigation discovered how much climate change was impacting the people. Desert regions have grown hotter and more inhospitable in recent years, which has caused countless people to move away from the areas they called home their entire lives. The violence that has dominated much of the country throughout a period of internal strife has contributed to the displacement of even more South Sudanese individuals and families. The brutal civil war dates back to 2013, shortly after the country declared independence from Sudan and became the newest official nation on Earth. Before that, Sudan had been embroiled in its own violent conflict for generations. Many of the brutal practices that were common in Sudan were also upheld by the leaders of South Sudan. The regime extinguished dozens of prisoners and hundreds more were sentenced to capital punishment under the country's strict legal system. To make matters worse, the nation was secretive about how it handled executions, so there were probably some forms of capital punishment carried out without being reported. Some children were reportedly handed down extreme sentences during the nation's extended period of fear and turmoil. Hundreds of thousands of people were taken out over 6 years as military leaders who backed the nation's president squared off against those who sided with former Vice President Riek Machar. With adequate health care and clean water in short supply, much of the nation has grown accustomed to living in reprehensible conditions. The vicious cycle of poverty is made even worse because nearly 3 in 4 South Sudanese citizens are believed to be illiterate. Things became so bad in this troubled nation that an organization with ties to George Clooney took an interest in exposing the situation to the rest of the world. He co-founded The Century, which performed a deep analysis of what had gone wrong in South Sudan and what other countries could do to help. Following the eye-popping results of that probe, Clooney warned nations worldwide that the unrest in South Sudan could soon expand to impact other regions of the planet. He said that people should care not just because it's the right thing to do, but because at one point or another, it's something that everyone will be dealing with. The group's report determined that a corrupt network at the helm of South Sudan's government has been responsible for defrauding the struggling citizens of the nation out of what little money they had. Although Lawrence was the flashy big spender, his stepfather was really wreaking havoc behind the scenes. Malong was the governor of the northern Bahr el Ghazal region between 2008 and 2014, but when he took over as a prominent military leader, his behavior triggered some red flags. He was the top officer in the South Sudan People's Defense Forces until May 2017. During that time, He served as a personal advisor to the president and allegedly orchestrated a series of war crimes. Dating back to 2013, two militia groups carried out a slew of executions with the apparent goal of protecting the president and Malong. Reports of the atrocities captured the attention of the United States, which tried and failed to impose sanctions against the general and other high-ranking officials. As the Sentry determined in its report, Malong also collected a range of luxury possessions and extravagant residences in Uganda throughout this period. One spacious home was built within a fortress and boasted a 7,000 square foot floor plan. A second villa was about 6,000 square feet of space, built in an exclusive Bungu community. In addition to his government salary, Malong and his close relatives maintained a financial interest in various international firms. President Kiir has also courted controversy through his alarming actions and conspicuous displays of wealth. Although his salary as president was a mere $60,000 per year, investigations found that he had amassed a fortune in other countries. Furthermore, his relatives were living in luxury and escaped the brutality and poverty affecting citizens in every corner of South Sudan. Close relatives of the president were tied to scams and schemes that allowed them to profit off the civil war while bringing more uncertainty and food insecurity to the nation. Kiir funded a sprawling ranch where he was free to store a range of weapons and other military gear that he bought with all his ill-gotten riches. There were even attack helicopters found at the ranch, leading to concerns that the unhinged president might turn his cache of weapons against the citizens he was supposed to be leading. While some corrupt political and military leaders can escape justice based on their financial assets and influential connections, Lawrence was finally brought to justice in 2021. He was eventually charged with a scam he perpetrated with a pair of accomplices. Prosecutors determined that the three scammers convinced a pair of foreign investors to sink their money into a fraudulent gold business in Uganda. As large sums of money moved through accounts based in multiple countries, evidence showed that the scam brought in more than $1 million. He was convicted on multiple counts, including conspiracy, obtaining money through false pretenses, and making false claims. At his sentencing, Lawrence learned he would spend 6 years behind bars for his involvement in the scheme. Although it might seem as though justice was paid in this case, plenty more work must be done to reduce the corruption and crime that continues to leave the South Sudanese people living in fear and poverty. These guys just can't help but just rat themselves out. Let's get right into just how dumb criminals can get. Number 4, let's rap about crime. 213 Jug God is a Texan rapper whose real name is Ladasian Riley. As a rapper, Riley makes hardcore songs about jugging. You would think that obviously jugging would mean that Riley is into doing things with jugs, playing the jug, putting stuff in jugs, hanging out with juggalos, collecting roughly 213 jugs, maybe even the occasional juggling show. Stuff like that can easily bring in up-and-comer loads of street cred in the hip-hop community. Actually, the jug in his name stands for jugging, and jugging is a street slang that means following unsuspecting victims and robbing them. 213, Jug God, was so into jugging that he actually wrote a jugging song called Make It Home, with lyrics bragging about stealing from ATMs. Really, being a god of jugging, what else was our man Riley going to do in his downtime? Not jug? Of course not. The lyrics of Make It Home describe robbing ATMs in different states, having thousands of dollars in the car, and trying to make it home before the police catch up. A deep and meaningful song that anyone could relate to. Most who heard the song might believe that 213 Jug God was just making up a story for his song, but it was actually his plan. The only difference was 213 Jug God didn't make it home. He was 213 Jug Got. 213 Jug God wasn't alone in his robbing escapades. He had 3 other juggers with him. His jug gang of 4, which included a juggette, jugged an ATM technician at the Bank of America. The crew approached the technician from behind as he serviced the machine, like a true jugger would, and forced him to hand over all the money in the machine, or there would be violence. Once they got the cash, the gang took the money and fled. 213 Jug God probably thought all about making it home, just like his song, However, things didn't quite pan out like that for our ragtag crew of jugging misfits. One of their getaway vehicles had been rented through Hertz, which allowed police to easily track their vehicle. In no time at all, police discovered the vehicle at a motel in Dixon, Tennessee. When police arrived, they decided to stake it out to see what kind of jugging activity they might find. And they found plenty. Police saw the gang load a Jeep up with cash, which was presumably jugged from the ATM, and then the gang checking out. After checking out, the suspects took off in different vehicles, but the police weren't about to let these juggers make it home. So they pursued the vehicles and quickly apprehended the jug buddies. Once all the jug friends were arrested, police discovered that this wasn't exactly 213 Jug God's first jugging rodeo. He was actually just out of prison on bond for an evading arrest charge. Police also discovered 213 Jug God's music and learned that he'd been bragging about jugging ATMs in his lyrics, so good luck with that not guilty plea. To add insult to injury, police made sure to mock 213 Jug God's ability to actually make it home in a Facebook post. Hopefully, 213 Jug God's church that worships him, he is a god after all, weren't too offended. Number 3, NBA player insurance scam. Former NBA player Terrence Williams was a first-round NBA pick out of Louisville who spent 6 seasons in the NBA with the Brooklyn Nets, Houston Rockets, Sacramento Kings, and Boston Celtics. Despite making a decent amount of money in the NBA, Williams wanted more. What he got was an indictment for leading a group of around 18 people to defraud the NBA through phony medical and dental insurance claims. Williams had recruited doctors in California and Washington, sent them false insurance claims, and got paid thousands of dollars in what turned out to be as embarrassing as his jump shot. Williams recruited other NBA players by offering to provide them with false invoices that supported their own fraudulent claims. Williams got these invoices from the doctors he'd recruited and then had the players submit the fake claims to the NBA insurance plan. He also recruited non-medical professionals to copy the invoices made by medical offices. The FBI investigators said that these invoices were usually poorly done. They often had typos, had no letterhead, and often contained misspelled names. Despite the unsophisticated nature of the scheme, Williams earned about $300,000. Aside from creating fake invoices, Williams was a true Renaissance man that also dabbled in identity theft. He used an email account designed to impersonate an employee of the NBA health insurance plan to frighten a doctor who wanted to back out of the scheme. Williams threatened the doctor by saying to either pay a fine or he would tell the authorities about the false invoices and claims, allowing Williams to net over $346,000. Williams' scam couldn't carry on forever, though, since he'd made so many mistakes that his arrest was inevitable. The invoices submitted were obviously fake, and some of the participants in the crime had made obvious slip-ups, like billing the NBA from states the teams didn't visit. Even after the scheme went bust and Williams was caught, he still went about threatening witnesses. Williams texted threats to a witness and told them that they were talking too much and that horrible things could befall them if they continued speaking. In the end, Williams pled guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit healthcare and wire fraud. The crimes he was charged with carry a maximum term of about 20 years in prison. Williams was also charged with 1 count of aggravated identity theft, which carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 2 years in prison. As part of his guilty plea, he agreed to pay a restitution of $2.5 million to the plan and to forfeit roughly $650,000 to the U.S. government. Number 2, buy high, sell low. Michael Melchizedek's operation started way back in 2013 when he just founded his company called ZetaKicks. The company found quick success and was soon a popular online plug for sneakerheads, people who collect and trade rare or exclusive sneakers. These sneakers are usually quite expensive and often run into thousands and thousands of dollars. It's a lucrative gig if you know what you're doing, but Michael Melchizedek thought it'd be more lucrative if he instead was running a nationwide Ponzi-like scheme, defrauding thousands of customers out of about $70 million pretending to sell shoes. Not long after its inception, ZetaKicks became a ridiculously successful company, making Michael Melchizedek a very rich man. But in early 2020, things started to get a bit complicated. During that time, ZetaKicks repeatedly promised its customers access to exclusive shoes that were yet to be on the market, and oftentimes promised them at lower than retail prices. These sneakers were usually highly sought after and sold out within minutes. Even other retailers wanted to buy from ZetaKicks because they could resell the shoes at a profit. However, ZetaKicks had a catch. Customers could only get these shoes if they paid for pre-orders. Just like that, Zetakick started taking payments for pre-orders. The only small problem for Melchizedek, couldn't fulfill the pre-orders, and he knew it when he started taking them. Melchizedek accepted 600,000 pre-orders for Air Jordan 11 Cool Grays and had put the sneakers on sale for about $115 to $200 a pair when Nike was expected to sell them for about $225. The 600,000 orders amounted to about $70 million. These were incredible sales, but the problem was Melchizedek had only 6,000 pairs in his storehouse, leaving a $593,000 deficit. The responsible thing at this point would be to refund his customers, but Michael had never been accused of being responsible and did no such thing. Instead, he offered his customers a combination of gift cards and refunds, allowing him to keep a huge chunk of the pre-order payments. Still, many orders were left without refunds, and even orders that were fulfilled only got to their destinations a year or so later. Aside from owing shoes to customers that didn't get refunded, the gift cards Melchizedek offered them were simply not equivalent to payments they made. So, Michael Melchizedek did what any person would do after they fleeced millions of dollars. He decided to move on with his life. Melchizedek used the money he got from his illegal scheme to purchase luxury items and live a wealthy lifestyle. He posted videos of himself riding around on a $29,000 Louis Vuitton bicycle inside his Oregon mansion and showed off an extremely expensive collection of Ferraris and Gerard Perrault watches. He also bought a Bentley, Porsche, Ferrari, Mercedes, Lamborghini, and a McLaren. Aside from all the cars, Melchizedek also purchased expensive furs, bags, and other luxury items for his fiancée, Bethany Mockerman. According to the police, he also used part of the money to finance a house payment with $600,000 worth of remodeling work done. It seemed like there was no way Melchizedek's life could be undone, but the entire scheme was quickly unraveling, and Michael realized that he couldn't keep the scam going for much longer. Melchizedek preempted the bankruptcy of the business by going to the courts and asking for the company to be dissolved and for its assets to be passed on to a court-appointed receiver. This receiver was supposed to use the company's assets to settle all outstanding debts that the company might have incurred. After doing that, Michael deleted his social media accounts and deleted the company's website as well. Following the dissolution of the business, the FBI began investigating the company, and they found some incredible things. They discovered that Michael was in fact selling sneaker pre-orders without actually having those sneakers, and he failed to refund those payments as well. But that was just the tip of the shoe. The FBI also discovered that the company provided false and misleading information to banks when applying for loans, and that his fiancée, Bethany Mockerman, was complicit in the scam. The FBI deemed the entire operation a criminal enterprise and swiftly moved in. Law enforcement agents were able to seize millions of dollars in cash and recovered another $6.4 million from the sale of the watches and cars. They also found out that Michael had 4,700 Yeezys, 8,500 Adidas shoes, and 48,000 Nike shoes in a warehouse in his house. The couple was also arrested to boot, pun intended. According to their attorney, both Michael and Bethany were cooperating with law enforcement. In the end, the FBI decided to charge both Bethany and Michael with conspiracy to commit bank fraud and money laundering. The only shoes we think Michael should wear is, of course, con number 1. We love attention. Johnny Richardson and Micaiah Taylor conspired with a government worker to steal thousands of dollars meant to support individuals who lost their jobs due to the coronavirus pandemic. The government worker involved was Brandy Hawkins, and without her, the scam would have never gone through. Actually, Hawkins was the reason the couple was even caught in the first place, when police discovered the couple through Hawkins' social media. The couple had been showing off their new pandemic-funded lavish lifestyle on social media. In one post, Johnny Richardson bought a $130,000 Benz for Taylor's birthday, proclaiming he'd already bought her a big house and that for some reason she deserved a gratuitously expensive car purchased with stolen funds. Maybe he was mad at her? Like, happy birthday, here's a vehicle that will be used as evidence for your future incarceration. I posted it on social media to make it easier to find. Happy B-Day, love you, XOXO. The couple continued to flaunt their extravagant lifestyles, even though neither of them had enough money to be living so lavishly. In fact, one of Taylor's confusing pictures, she was in a bikini, soaking in a bathtub filled with milk water, surrounded by dead rose petals. She must think that the wealthy take baths in dirty water with detritus floating around in it while wearing bathing suits. They also posted pictures of themselves wearing extremely expensive jewelry, driving other luxury vehicles, and flaunting large amounts of government cash. The Police discovered Taylor and Richardson's social media brags when Hawkins was investigated for using her insider access to grant hundreds of thousands in fraudulent and unemployment claims. When the police discovered Hawkins' scam, they searched her home and discovered over $238,000 in cash, as well as receipts for Louis Vuitton merchandise and other high-end luxury items. Once police got access to Hawkins' phone records, they found incriminating conversations between her and other thieves. One of the phone numbers that Hawkins regularly texted was linked to one MDMH beauty bar. Officials looked at the page and discovered that it belonged to Taylor. Once the police found Taylor's Instagram page and saw how lavishly she and her boyfriend lived, they knew that something was up and decided to investigate. Upon further investigation, they discovered that Taylor, Richardson, and Hawkins regularly spoke about getting these fraudulent unemployment benefits and that they were all in cahoots. There was a lot of cahooting between the three. After going through Taylor and Richardson's Instagram accounts, the police decided that there was enough cause to arrest the couple. However, Richardson got word before he could be arrested and skedaddled out of town. Taylor wasn't so lucky. She was arrested and charged with wire fraud. If convicted, she could spend up to 20 years in prison for the crime. When Taylor eventually appeared in the court, she was wearing one of the luxury items she took pictures with on Instagram. Instead, she was in handcuffs and a blue zip-up jacket. Her lawyer requested bail, but the prosecutor was pretty adamant she remain in custody. He argued that the police still didn't know where the majority of their loot was and didn't know where boyfriend of the year Richardson ran off to. This, the government argued, made Taylor a flight risk. The judge ignored prosecution's recommendation and released her on a $10,000 unsecured bond. Ultimately, Richardson was caught and made to face justice as well. The couple both pled guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Richardson was eventually sentenced to 97 months in prison, and Taylor was sentenced to 30 months in prison. What are all the things that could go wrong when people use social media? Let's get started with number 7. Thanks for all the proof. Levi Watson was talked to by the police about his possible role as a contraband dealer in a gang. Of course, Watson said he had no connection to the gang and claimed to be flat broke. Broke as a joke. Then, like the criminal mastermind he is, he posted pictures on social media that would make Tony Montana blush, completely contradicting his broke claim. Every brag was like a breadcrumb leading the authorities straight to his illicit empire. Because if you're going to break the law and lie to the police, you should always post it on social media. If you don't, how are people going to know how awesome you are? And how will they even know about your criminal empire? The police had a front row seat to Watson's ostentatious displays, gathering all the evidence they needed from his social media accounts. Watson's fatal flaw, aside from brain power, was his need for the limelight. Watson uploaded posts of himself with Rolexes, one post with a white Ferrari like he was making a calendar or something, and another post where he was literally bathing himself in money. The tub was filled with 20-pound notes, which is still a lot of money, but it's a bit underwhelming too. If you're bragging about how excessively wealthy you are, shouldn't it have 100-pound notes? Just saying. Also, that money was probably filthy, so there's that. Other brags included some watches on the gear stick of a Porsche Panamera with the caption asking you, personally, have seen 100,000. Politely, Watson says that if you hadn't, then it looks like that. Now you've seen it, thanks to Watson, and you can go about your day with your brain a bit fuller. Another picture showed Jamaican $1,000 bills and a gold watch with the caption, when you're sitting on over $250,000, but you tell them it's pennies. That way, if police weren't sure if Watson was lying about being flat broke, he let them know he was. The police were like, wait, you mean those bills aren't pennies? They were probably so confused. Watson also seemed to be unsure about what's a chair and what's not. Sitting on watches will break them, Levi. They're not chairs. The pictures became evidence of his shady dealings, basically doing all the police work that needed to be done. How was Watson possibly going to explain his posts while being flat broke? But instead of showing any sort of remorse, Watson bragged about his imminent prison sentence. Obviously, everyone thinks going to prison is cool, so why not brag about it? Watson also bragged about his notorious achievements in the contraband trade, painting himself as a larger-than-life anti-hero. His unapologetic demeanor fueled public outrage, making him both a target of scorn and a symbol of audacity in the face of justice. Watson, in a brazen move, released a song that glorified his criminal exploits. He also released a video for it that appears to follow all COVID safety protocols, because following all COVID safety protocols is pretty gangsta. Of course, he tried to have a music career. This guy is as dumb as he is cliche. The provocative tracks sparked heated debates, with critics questioning the morality of profiting from illegal activities. Apparently, these critics have never listened to a hip-hop track, if that's what they're stuck on. Ultimately, the authorities made significant progress in dismantling the contraband ring, leading to the arrest of 12 other individuals involved in the operation. Levi Watson was just one among the many apprehended, facing severe consequences for his role. Watson received a 7-year prison sentence, then bragged about that on social media as well. In another post, next to a picture of rapper Bobby Shmurda, Watson says that they gave him Shmurda years. So he smiled at the judge when he said 7. Shmurda was handed 7 years in prison for his crimes a few years back. Man, that judge was probably so embarrassed that Levi smiled at him when he got his sentence. So when Watson was sent to his prison cell, the judge probably drove home to his big house and felt so mad and humiliated. He probably looked at himself in the mirror and said something like, "Well, you won this round, Watson. You really showed me," and then slouched in his leather recliner and watched his big screen TV, wishing he had it all figured out like the guy he just sent to prison does. Number 6. Crashing for YouTube. Christopher and Kimberly Phelps from Yucaipa, California, are in hot water for their outrageous antics. These two brains are accused of causing car crashes on purpose, all in the name of scoring fraudulent insurance payouts. But here's where we learn what brain power truly is. The two had a YouTube channel called Blue3Go57, where over 160 videos were posted showcasing their intentional crashes. We're talking heart-stopping collisions, near misses, and hair-raising road rage incidents. These videos became a digital fingerprint of their deliberate actions. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department caught wind of the YouTube channel and teamed up with the California Department of Insurance to bring them to justice. It was a high-stakes investigation involving search warrants, countless hours of video analysis, and even social media investigation to track down more victims. That said, the investigation was probably set on easy mode, since the best place to hide video evidence of crimes is on YouTube. If it wasn't for their idiotic desire for fame, the Phelpses might have gotten away with it, but they just had to be YouTube stars, flaunting their crimes for all to see. And if their wild antics weren't enough, the Phelps couple also faced charges of child endangerment. They had their own innocent kid in the car during some of their reckless stunts, because it's always best to have a kid in the car when you're intentionally getting in accidents. How could that possibly go wrong, you know? Christopher had already been nabbed once before for similar charges. You'd think he would have learned his lesson, but nope. Now he and his partner in crime, Kimberly, are looking at a bunch of charges. It looks like the Phelpses ultimately got the fame they wanted and a free stay in a bigger house. Parents of the Year awards are likely on the way. Number 5. The Show-Off Gang. Salvador and Ivan Ramirez, brothers from Long Beach, California, orchestrated a series of heists that had law enforcement on their toes. The duo, along with their gang, went on a crime spree that left a trail of disbelief. Accused of running a criminal empire, the Ramirez brothers faced an impressive number of charges. Over 100 crimes are attributed to their name. Ma and Pa Ramirez are probably so proud. The brothers struck fear into the hearts of the Indian community, renowned for their opulent gold jewelry worn during traditional rituals and cultural festivals. What made the Ramirez brothers true masters of their craft was their ability to vanish without a trace. Like ghosts, they left no DNA or fingerprints behind, always one step ahead of the law. Their planning and attention to detail meant that not a shred of evidence remained at the crime scenes. But while their crimes remained hidden, the Ramirez brothers couldn't resist the urge to brag online. They took to social media, flaunting their ill-gotten gains for the world to see. They posted pictures of exquisite watches, gleaming gold bars, and stacks of cash that would make anyone's heart skip a beat. Little did they know, these pictures would serve as their downfall, leading the authorities straight to their doorstep. The Ramirez brothers were as meticulous as they were brain dead. They scoured the internet for information, identifying families with common Indian surnames as potential targets. Their use of disposable mobile phones ensured their anonymity, while their elegant attire and luxury vehicles allowed them to blend seamlessly into the background. And their reign of crime knew no boundaries. They ventured far and wide, crisscrossing California and even leaving their mark in the neighboring state of Nevada. All in all, the burglary gang stole over $1 million in gold jewelry and were said to have been committing 2 burglaries a week before getting caught. It seems like a whole lot of work to just tell on yourself on social media, doesn't it? Number 4, shining light. Kevin Gaines Jr. was apprehended by Florida deputies after a chase that played out live on Instagram. The fugitive had been on the run for weeks, wanted on a string of charges, including a carjacking. A deputy had seen the car Gaines was believed to be driving at a residence in DeLand, Florida. As they closed in on their target, Gaines started live streaming his every move on Instagram because, hey, anything for views, right? The internet would totally think he was cool for the entire length of his stream, and then it would immediately forget it. Despite knowing Gaines' location, officers still had to move cautiously as Gaines was known to carry weapons and was said to be dangerous. Knowing his precise location inside the house could help keep everyone safe, but how could officers know where he was? As Gaines continued his live stream, the deputies shined a powerful spotlight through a window, and there was the light captured in the background of the live stream. Now deputies knew exactly where he was. Undeterred by the presence of friends and relatives who tried to protect Gaines, the police stormed the house, ready to bring the chase to an end. Gaines' friends attempted to deceive the officers, claiming he wasn't inside, and one woman even went so far as to bet $100 that Gaines wasn't there. Like the cop was going to say, "Oh, you're on," or, "Oh, wow, he must not really be here if she's willing to put money down on it. Yeah, we should go." Eventually, Gaines emerged from the house, and the deputies wasted no time in arresting him. Gaines had a history of run-ins with the law, such as having been arrested for carjacking. Well, he faced additional charges, which included grand theft auto, resisting a law enforcement officer, and fleeing law enforcement. Number 3, Lance Armstronging. Andy Airy was a cyclist from Bristol in the UK. Airy's life took a jolting detour during his daily commute in 2015 when he was knocked off his bike. The driver quickly admitted fault, leaving the insurance company QBE to cover the damages. But as the wheels of suspicion began to turn, QBE engaged the services of the formidable law firm Berrymans, Lace and Maurer, confusingly known as BLM. QBE wanted to dig deeper into Airy's claims, particularly focusing on his alleged knee injury. The fraud intelligence team at BLM delved into Airy's social media presence and uncovered a series of posts both before and after the accident. Astonishingly, just before undergoing a medical examination to support his claim in March 2016, Airy shared Strava activities showcasing his running, cycling, and even participation in triathlons. The most damning evidence was a recorded bike ride on the very day of his medical examination. You're probably thinking, wow, all of that on a bum knee. Impressive. Why is this hero in trouble? Sorry, Airy has played you for the fool as well. His knee injury was fake. For those unfamiliar, Strava is a popular fitness tracking app used by athletes and fitness enthusiasts to record their activities, including running, cycling, and swimming. Users can share their accomplishments and progress with the Strava community. When confronted with this undeniable proof, Airy's own medical expert acknowledged that the road traffic collision couldn't have caused his alleged knee injury. He said it was more likely due to a pre-existing degenerative condition, probably the same one found in his brain. Realizing the weight of the evidence against him, Airy withdrew his claim for damage. However, BLM continued to pursue Airy, leading to a trial in Bristol County Court. The judge ruled that Airy's intention was to associate his knee injury with the 2015 collision, labeling his actions as fundamentally dishonest. Consequently, Airy was ordered to pay the defendant's costs, amounting to around £40,000. The impact of this case extended beyond his personal penalty. QBE, the insurer, managed to save approximately £145,000 in damages and legal expenses. So thank heavens for that. We're sure they passed those savings right on to the consumer. Number 2, caught in a snap. In an incredibly stupid sequence of events, Christopher Wallace, and no, not that Christopher Wallace, sealed his own fate with a series of major blunders that led the police straight to him. With a manhunt underway, the Somerset County Sheriff's Office was determined to track down Wallace, who was wanted in connection with a burglary. Wallace, in a move that can only be described as dumb, decided to broadcast his location to the world through Snapchat. First, he posted a Snapchat message proudly announcing his return to his home in Fairfield, Maine, while being aware of the search, because he's dumb. That post, unsurprisingly, didn't go unnoticed. Quick-thinking citizens friends who spotted Wallace's announcement wasted no time in tipping off authorities. So, the officers stormed Wallace's residence, and as they searched the premises, a new Snapchat message came in. It was Wallace, being slick now that the police were in the same house as he was, posting that he was heading to a different location to throw police off so he could make another escape. Just kidding, he actually revealed his hiding spot in the post, which was in a cabinet in the kitchen. The cops, already actively searching the house, found him by his feet, which were sticking out of one of the cabinets. So Christopher got himself arrested, which seems like it was going to be inevitable. Christopher's friend, Erica Hall, was also arrested for telling police she hadn't seen him in weeks while he was hiding in the kitchen behind her. Number 1. Fairy tale fraud. Amanda Zeminski was a nurse at South Shore Physicians in Staten Island. During her tenure at the medical practice, Zeminski hatched an ingenious plan to amass a fortune. Exploiting her access to personal information, Zeminski stole patients' identities, targeting the vulnerable and unsuspecting elderly. Amanda teamed up with her boyfriend, Clyde C-Money CEO Forteau, a name likely given to him by another CEO of a Fortune 500 company, we're sure. And together, they embarked on a daring spree of extravagant spending. Imagine a life filled with lavish jewelry, courtside seats at electrifying sports events, and even a romantic rendezvous in the magical realm of Disney World. They were living the dream afforded to them by the hard work of identity theft. Facebook became their personal gallery of opulence. C-Money CEO Forteau proudly boasted about his proximity to Jay-Z during a Jets game and his position in front of the late Aaron Hernandez, the infamous former New England Patriot tight end, at Game 6 of the NBA semifinals. Zeminski also proudly displayed her dazzling engagement ring, a symbol of their love and their love of identity theft, given to her at the enchanting Cinderella's castle. Their escapades eventually got the attention of law enforcement. In a turn of events, investigators uncovered a trail of evidence connecting Zeminski and Forteau to their scheme, all from their social media bragging. Surprise, surprise. Their victims, the unsuspecting elderly people, had their lives turned upside down. Their bank accounts were emptied, fraudulent credit cards were opened in their names, and even their tax refunds were stolen through bogus income tax returns. The duo's ill-gotten gains amounted to $675,000. As fate would have it, Zeminski's reign of deception met a sudden end when she was unceremoniously terminated from her job for lying about how many hours she worked. The truth began unraveling, and the police closed on the couple's extravagant facade. Forteau's sleek BMW 7 Series that he worked so hard to steal through fraud became a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. Police seized over 50 credit cards and a cache of stolen and forged driver's licenses. During the investigation, the police also seized a collection of Rolex watches adorned with dazzling jewels, a money clip engraved with Forteau's nickname, as well as patient files and a substantial amount of cash. Facing the consequences of their crimes, Zeminski, Forteau, and their cohorts are on trial. Charges including identity theft, enterprise corruption, and a litany of other criminal counts hang over their heads. If convicted, they could be looking at a substantial prison sentence, fitting end to their once glamorous lives of crime and ill-gotten opulence. Hey, at least Forteau is still a CEO, right? If you type AC4Os or Intro 4Os into your Google search bar, you'll find a music video written and performed by Orlando AC4Os Henderson. The song kicks off Henderson's album called Straight Out of the Cleaners, and the album's cover features AC standing in a laundromat flicking a $100 bill at the camera as he blows a puff of smoke. However, the album cover isn't nearly as interesting as the music video, which begins with Henderson rapping as the video cross-cuts between two locations. In one spot, Henderson is sitting shirtless on a blue couch, waving around a gun. The other scene shows Henderson dancing in a gas station while holding a wad of cash. Waving dollar bills around or making it rain in music videos is quite common, a cliche by modern standards. But cash truly is everything to Henderson. His life motto is "Ain't wit being broke," a simple phrase he uses in every facet of his life and business. But while it's easy to print the saying on t-shirts and sing it in rap songs, avoiding financial hardship can be difficult, especially if you're like Henderson, who in 2013 dropped far below broke. In 2013, Henderson filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy, owing over $26,000 to various creditors. In July, Henderson agreed to pay them $447 per month for 60 months. However, in August, the administrators filed a motion in court to dismiss Henderson's case. Their reason? AC4Os neglected to attend a 341 meeting between him and his creditors. A 341 meeting is like an interrogation of the person in debt. It's a chance for the creditors to question them them under oath about their assets and liabilities. He also failed to show up for his debtor education class, a program that helps people with poor money management skills learn how to avoid debt, which was a part of the terms he supposedly agreed to in court. Henderson was horrible with money and clearly could not be trusted. It only seems fitting that he'd eventually get a job at the bank. As you can probably guess, that bank was Wells Fargo. Henderson began working at their Charlotte location as a vault runner. To put it bluntly, the man who went bankrupt 6 years ago received the literal key to a vault filled with millions of dollars. Henderson started his new job in April of 2019. In their indictment, investigators believe Henderson wasted no time in stealing money. After working at the bank for 2 months, Henderson hatched a brilliant idea. He could steal money from the vault whenever a customer made a deposit. However, he knew he'd have to start small, so Henderson's first score was only $446. Coincidentally, $1 less than what he'd agreed to pay his creditors back in 2013. Nobody seemed to be missing the money. To Henderson, the scheme was a success. Henderson decided to steal a little bit less the next time. Perhaps he wasn't ready to press his luck. Not just yet. His second swipe amounted to $200. A few days later, Henderson strolled back into the vault and stole another $411. You would think that someone would notice if $1,000 went missing. Apparently, nobody did. Henderson knew the bank would eventually catch on. He was smart enough to come up with ways to cover his tracks, but dumb enough to think they'd work. He created false deposit documents and even went as far as to destroy real documents filled out by customers. If there was no paper trail of the deposit, how could anyone prove the money was there to begin with? Henderson's clever cover-ups worked at first, as no one seemed to notice. To launder the stolen cash, Henderson deposited the money in a nearby ATM. Seeing the money falling into his bank account must have looked good, because the next day, on June 21st, Henderson came into work and scraped another $850 from a customer's account. From the 21st onward, a massive shift occurred in Henderson's thinking. After that $850 was deposited, the Carolina rapper started taking his embezzlement scheme to new and dangerous heights. According to investigative records, on June 24th, Henderson stole $5,400. The very next day, he stole another $5,000. The day after that, he downsized to $1,300. After the 26th, Henderson took a 5-day hiatus from ripping off Wells Fargo customers. He probably felt like he deserved a vacation. However, the hiatus only served as a consolidation period. Henderson was already riding down a slippery slope, which felt more like a high, if anything. He continued to steal cash from the vaults, this time in far larger amounts. Henderson's increasing payload played out like a 3-act play. He began slowly with the first $400, taking baby steps until he was stealing a few thousand here and there. By the show's climax, Henderson had stolen over $13,000 in one day before ending on one last $3,000 score, his final farewell. The grand total added up to $88,000. So, what did Henderson do with the money he stole? As mentioned before, he put some in his bank account. The deposited money, specifically $20,000, was used to put a down payment on a brand new shiny white Mercedes-Benz. Besides the car, Henderson kept most of the cash in his home, prompting one of his friends to comment on how strange it was that he kept it lying around. He wondered if Henderson had ever heard of a bank. Of course, Henderson knew more than most about banks. He knew enough about banks to forge statements, which Henderson used to finance his 2019 Mercedes, which he spent more time taking pictures of than actually driving. Henderson made sure his social media followers knew how good 2019 had been to him. One post from July 6th shows 4 photos of Henderson with 3 stacks that probably add up to $30K. The first photo depicts Henderson hiding his face behind a fan of cash as if he's playing cards. The second was a candid shot of Henderson making it rain, and the third shows him, after apparently picking the money up, holding the greenbacks in 3 stacks thicker than a Harry Potter book. Then, on September 9th, Henderson posted a selfie with his white Benz. He stood in the foreground holding a blue designer bag in his right hand, while the left gestured to the camera. And if you look close enough, you could see a shiny Gucci belt wrapped around his waist. Though there's no flaunted cash in this post, you get the message. Henderson ain't wit being broke, but not so good at writing captions. Under the Benz selfie, Henderson wrote, "Brand new deposit," followed by a box emoji, an airplane, a big van, and a handicap sign. In the first post, Henderson claims he got the money out the mud after he made it out the trenches, followed by a broken down home emoji and a camera to signify where he supposedly came from and where he is now. In other words, if you were an ignorant social media scroller and happened upon Henderson's posts in 2019, you'd think he was a remarkable rags to riches story, not a lower middle class man in his late 20s who stole from the bank vaults at Wells Fargo. Eventually, reality would creep up on Henderson. Eventually, bank officials became suspicious and called in investigators to determine why and how $88,000 was missing from their vault. After examining each employee, one stood above the rest. The only employee posting pictures with large amounts of cash, expensive clothes, designer accessories, and a luxury car that far surpassed his pay grade. On December 4th, 5 months after his first theft, the FBI arrested Henderson in San Diego. He was brought to a federal detention center, informed of his 19 charges, including theft, embezzlement, 12 counts of fabricating false entries, and money laundering. The feds then provided Henderson with a public defender named Benjamin Davis, who did not bother to defend his client when reporters called for interviews. Eventually, federal officials moved Henderson to the crime scene, North Carolina. Not long after his cross-state move, Henderson pleaded guilty to all charges in a federal court in Charlotte. The date was March 20th, meaning Henderson was moved around by feds like a wayward Amazon package between December and March. Nevertheless, Henderson still managed to release a new rap single. The single was called, and we're not making this up, First Day Out. On January 11th, only a few weeks after being detained by the FBI, Henderson officially released the song on YouTube. Say what you will about Orlando Henderson, but even his harshest critics have to admit he has impeccable timing. Henderson was formally charged for his crimes and is staring down the barrel of a hefty prison sentence and multi-million-dollar fine. However, Henderson is currently a free man, as he's innocent until proven guilty in court. While his case moves through the process, Henderson seems to think everything's fine. Scrolling through his social media pages, you'd never think anything bad happened. The free man posted his homecoming on Facebook, saying he was ready to conquer the summer, and conquer he did. Throughout the summer of 2021 and the subsequent fall months, Henderson wanted his followers to know he was still, quote, ain't wit being broke. 2 days after announcing his return home, Henderson posted a picture of himself on Facebook wearing a hoodie with the caption, "He put up for a min." Then, on August 28th, he posted a picture of himself standing in front of his white Mercedes captioned, "Somewhere in the trenches in that same Benz," implying he still owns the Mercedes he bought back in 2019. It seems very odd that Henderson was able to keep the Mercedes after financing the vehicle with a falsified loan application. There is a possibility the photo Henderson posted was taken in 2019, and he added the caption to mislead people into thinking he kept the car, leaving his actual living circumstances in a shroud of fake hustle game mystery. We may never know what Henderson is really up to, but perhaps we can try to understand why. Ain't wit being broke is much more than a phrase to Henderson. It's a mindset. He lives and dies by the mantra, ain't wit being broke. He named his own record label after the motto and printed the logo on his t-shirts. However, ain't wit being broke doesn't mean Henderson avoids being broke. No, it means he avoids looking broke, as evidenced by Henderson's social media posts and the brutal reality printed on court and state documents. Ain't wit being broke is more like an exposed nerve or a real-life Achilles heel. When struck, it reveals its owner's most profound insecurities. Henderson will eventually face the music once the state is satisfied with the case against him. Until then, he remains innocent until proven guilty.
Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section what you'd rather do. Not post on social media for a year or have $1,000 instead.